The late afternoon sun dips low over the rolling hills of Wessex, casting long pale amber shadows across the empty fields. The great harvest of autumn has passed, leaving behind a landscape that is quiet, still, and preparing for a deep, enduring rest. In the closing years of the 9th century, the rhythm of human life is bound entirely to the soil, the sky, and the slow, unhurried turning of the seasons. Across the valleys, the vast tracts of ancient woodland stand like silent guardians, their branches stripped of summer leaves, forming intricate, dark lace against the soft grey canvas of the winter sky. The air is crisp and biting, carrying with it the unmistakable scent of approaching snow and the gentle, comforting aroma of wood smoke rising from the distant hearths of small agrarian hamlets. With every passing hour, the natural light softens, dissolving the sharp edges of the world into a tranquil haze. The earth itself seems to sigh as the cold settles into the deep furrows of the ploughed fields, where the dark, rich soil is gradually hardened by the first touch of winter frost. Along the old dirt tracks and the mossy remnants of ancient stone pathways, tiny crystals of ice begin to form, catching the faint residual glimmer of the fading sun. It is a time when the hurried labours of the warmer months give way to a profound, widespread stillness. The cattle have been brought into the shelter of the low-ceilinged byres, their breath rising in soft rhythmic plumes of white mist in the cool air. The sheep rest quietly in their wattled pens, their heavy wool coats protecting them from the chill that creeps down from the northern ridges. In the heart of the village, the small timber-framed dwellings cluster together as if seeking warmth from one another. Their thick roofs of golden thatch, weathered by time and rain, are now dusted with a delicate layer of hoarfrost that glistens softly in the twilight. Inside these homes, the hearth fire is the undisputed centre of existence, a steady pulsing source of amber light and gentle warmth. The flames lap lazily around heavy logs of seasoned oak and ash, sending up soft crackles and a steady stream of smoke that drifts lazily upward through the thatch. Joining the mist that hangs over the valley, there is no haste here. The work of human hands has shifted from the vast expanse of the open fields to the intimate, quiet confines of the fireside. As the darkness deepens, the silence of the landscape becomes absolute. The birds have long since sought refuge in the deep thickets of hawthorn and ivy, their songs replaced by the subtle, melodic whispering of the winter wind moving through the reeds of the frozen riverbanks. The water flows slowly now, heavy and dark beneath the fringes of clear ice that creep outward from the muddy shores. Every element of the natural world seems to be moving in harmony toward a state of quiet suspension. The heavy wooden doors of the great tithe barns are securely shut, their iron latches cold to the touch. Holding within their massive timber frames the collective wealth of the village, the mounds of dried grain, the stacks of processed flax, and the heavy bundles of sheep's wool. The people of this era understand the deep necessity of this seasonal pause. The long winter nights are not merely a passage of time, but a sanctuary of quietude, a period where the earth recovers its strength beneath its cold mantle. The sky above clears as night fully takes hold, revealing a vast velvet expanse studded with countless brilliant stars that look down upon the sleeping kingdoms of Britain. The constellations wheel slowly, marking the hours with a majestic, unhurried pace that mirrors the timeless endurance of the land below. In this quiet corner of the world, far removed from the bustling courts of kings and the turbulence of distant shores, the evening deepens, wrapping the fields, the forests, and the small timber homes in a blanket of peaceful, unbroken serenity. As the deep midwinter takes a firm hold upon the land, a heavy, silent blanket of snow begins to fall, transforming the rolling landscape of Wessex into a vast, unblemished sea of white. The individual flakes drift lazily through the barren branches of the ancient oaks, settling softly upon the frozen earth with a gentle, imperceptible touch that accumulates hour by hour. The ancient highroads, many of them laid down centuries earlier by the straight, unyielding hands of Roman engineers, are slowly and completely erased from view. These stone-paved pathways, which during the vibrant months of autumn served as the vital arteries of regional commerce and communication, now lie buried beneath deep, impassable drifts of snow that obscure the markers and hide the treacherous ditches. The great wooden carts that once creaked and groaned under the heavy weight of harvest yields, are now brought to an absolute standstill, their heavy oak wheels rimmed with white frost, resting uselessly beneath the overhanging eaves of the thatch-roofed barns. The oxen and horses whose steady hooves once measured the miles between isolated hamlets remain warm within the dark safety of their stalls, their breath rising like soft, rhythmic clouds of pale mist in the cool, quiet interiors of the stables. With the complete closure of these high roads, a profound sense of isolation descends upon each small agricultural settlement. The fragile, informal networks that connect the lonely villages to the larger market towns and the distant monastic centres of learning are quietly severed by the unyielding elements. No messengers arrive from the royal courts with urgent proclamations, and no wandering peddlers arrive with stories from distant shires or exotic goods from across the southern sea. The world beyond the immediate horizon becomes a distant, abstract thought enveloped entirely in the grey, misty curtain of the winter sky. This winter isolation is not a source of panic or distress for the inhabitants, but rather a slow, deeply accepted reality of early medieval life. A sacred time when human communities must rely entirely upon their own internal strength, their stored provisions, and the deep, silent trust that binds neighbour to neighbour within the perimeter of the hamlet. The rivers and streams, which usually provide an alternative route for the movement of small wooden boats and flat-bottomed barges, are now bound in iron-like sheets of thick, translucent ice. The rhythmic splashing of water against the muddy riverbanks has been replaced by an eerie, majestic silence, broken only occasionally by the deep, resonant crack of the ice adjusting itself to the shifting currents flowing far below the frozen surface. Along the frozen edges, the dead reeds and rushes are encased in a heavy crystalline armour, clinking together softly like delicate glass bells when a stray gust of winter wind sweeps across the lonely valley. The watermills, so loud, vibrant and industrious during the grain-grinding season of late autumn, stand perfectly still in the landscape. Their massive wooden wheels are frozen fast in the icy embrace of the mill ponds, their dark timber paddles heavily encrusted with long, elegant icicles that gleam like polished silver in the pale, weak morning light of the winter sun. Inside the boundaries of the village, daily life shrinks to a small, deliberate radius centered around the survival of the household. The simple walk from the living quarters to the shared granary or the stone-lined well becomes a careful, measured journey through the deep, crunching snow. The air is so intensely cold that it catches sharply in the throat, carrying the clean, pure scent of frost and frozen earth. Every sound within the village is muffled and absorbed by the thick snow, creating an atmosphere of intense quietude where even the softest footstep feels like an intrusion into the earth's deep winter sleep. The traditional boundaries between the wilderness and the cultivated land seem to blur during these dark months as the wild deer from the deep forests venture closer to the village edges, their dark, watchful eyes observing the quiet timber homes from the safety of the snow-laden thickets. The human inhabitants observe this quiet convergence from their small shuttered windows, understanding that winter is a great leveler, reducing the entire world to its most fundamental elements of shelter, warmth, and the quiet preservation of life. In this frozen stillness, the flow of silver coinage, which is always incredibly scarce in these rural agricultural areas, grinds to an absolute and permanent halt. The merchants who would normally carry small jingling leather pouches of silver pennies to trade for wool or grain are trapped in distant towns, unable to risk the treacherous paths where the hidden landscape and marauding bands could easily bring disaster to their enterprises. The absence of these coins creates a strange, quiet pause in the commercial life of the village, a complete breakdown of the traditional ways of accounting for labour and produce. The physical absence of money, however, does not diminish the true value of what the farmers have produced through their sweat and toil. The wheat in the bins and the heavy fleeces in the lofts remain as real and valuable as ever, waiting patiently for a means to be measured, recognised, and recorded. In the absence of the king's silver, the community stands suspended in time, looking out at the silent, snow-choked high roads, waiting for an idea or a tool that will allow them to bridge the gap between their isolated abundance and the quiet demands of social and administrative order. The absence of silver coinage during the bitter cold of the 9th century brings a unique and heavy stillness to the agrarian communities of Wessex. In this era, the silver penny is a rare and precious object, minted in distant royal towns under the watchful eye of the king's moneyers. Each tiny disc of metal, stamped with the profile of the monarch and a delicate geometric cross, represents a tangible connection to the broader world of law and commerce. Yet to the ordinary farmer it is an elusive phantom seldom seen and rarely held. As the winter snow drifts deeper against the dark timber walls of the hamlets, the realization sets in that the meagre supply of silver has completely vanished from circulation. The local bailiffs and manorial lords still require their customary dues, and the complicated web of small loans between neighbours, a bushel of seed barley borrowed to survive the winter, a thick fleece promised for the spring shearing, remains active. Yet there is no physical currency to settle these obligations or balance the ledger of village life. This lack of a tangible medium of exchange breeds a subtle, quiet anxiety that drifts through the smoke-filled halls of the village like the cold winter mist itself. The smallholder farmers who have spent the spring and summer clearing heavy stones from the earth, guiding the massive wooden ploughs behind straining oxen, and harvesting the tall stalks of grain under a burning sun, now find themselves in a precarious state of economic suspension. Their massive tithe barns are filled with the true organic wealth of the land, beautiful golden wheat that smells of the summer earth, heavy bundles of coarse grey wool, and preserved meats hanging from the smoke-darkened rafters. Yet this magnificent abundance cannot easily be carried through the treacherous, snow-choked mountain passes to a distant market town, nor can it be easily divided into precise fractions to pay a small tax or a long-standing personal debt. The fear of being treated unfairly, or the simple human worry of an unwritten memory fading over the long, dark months of winter, weighs heavily on the hearts of the village elders. A man's spoken word is sacred, but when the numbers of bushels and the values of livestock accumulate week after week, the human mind naturally searches for something solid, something immutable to hold the truth intact against the passage of time. Inside the quiet, low-ceilinged huts, as the night winds howl against the thick-thatched eaves, the conversation naturally turns toward this pressing administrative dilemma. By the dim, flickering light of tallow candles, which cast long dancing shadows across the rough-hewn wooden walls and earth floors, the village families discuss the state of their storehouses. They know that every day the deep freeze continues, the risk of future disputes grows. If a neighbour forgets the exact measure of grain he borrowed during the first autumn frost, or if the Lord's visiting scribe records an inflated sum for the winter tribute, how can the illiterate farmer defend the fruits of his hard labour? The precious silver coins that once provided a clear, universally accepted standard of exchange are far out of reach, locked away in distant monastic treasuries or buried deep in the frozen earth by fearful merchants fleeing the coastal raids. The village requires a silent mediator, an incorruptible witness that does not rely on precious metals, scarce ink, or complex Latin scripts, which are known only to the highly educated clergy. This anxiety is not loud or disruptive, it is as quiet, steady, and persistent as the frost that slowly edges the small window shutters. It sits silently with the weaver at her heavy loom, whose wooden shuttle moves with a rhythmic, hypnotic clacking sound through the warp and weft, as she wonders how many yards of fine linen will equal the winter lease of her small plot of land. It sits with the elderly granary keeper, who attempts to mark the damp stone walls with simple charcoal strokes that can so easily be brushed away by a passing wool sleeve or blurred into illegibility by the damp morning air. The community recognizes that their entire social harmony and peaceful coexistence rely on absolute clarity and mutual trust, yet without an enduring system of physical record-keeping, that trust remains as vulnerable as a young seedling exposed to a winter storm. They look to the earth, to the familiar natural materials that surround them, seeking a solution that reflects the fundamental honesty of their daily labor and the timeless permanence of the ancient landscape that sustains them. The channel is a storytelling platform created for entertainment, inspiration, education, and the promotion of relaxation and peaceful sleep. Inside the thick, enduring stone walls of the local manorial estate, a profound and respectful quietude reigns supreme, completely shielding the inhabitants from the bitter frost that grips the world outside. The estate house, constructed from heavy, rough-hewn blocks of local limestone and supported by massive pillars of ancient oak, stands as a symbol of permanence and sanctuary in the shifting landscape of 9th century Wessex. On this deep midwinter evening, the village elders have gathered within the grand hall, their movements slow, deliberate, and full of a quiet dignity that comes from a lifetime of living in harmony with the natural cycles of the earth. They have been invited to sit beside the great central hearth by the estate bailiff, not to engage in tense negotiation or hurried debate, but to seek a peaceful, elegant remedy for the economic stalemate that has silently frozen their winter commerce. The atmosphere inside the hall is heavy with the scent of burning pine logs, seasoned ash, and the rich, comforting aroma of mulled cider that warms gently in a large iron cauldron suspended over the licking flames. The great hall is an architecture of deep shadows and soft amber light, where the flickering glow of the fire dances gracefully across the dark timber beams overhead. These massive beams, blackened by years of rising hearth smoke, hold up a roof of thick thatch that completely absorbs the howling winter winds, rendering the interior perfectly still. The elders sit in a wide circle upon low wooden benches covered with thick, coarse sheepskins that provide both warmth and comfort. Their heavy woolen cloaks, dyed in quiet earth tones of madder red, woad blue and forest green, drape elegantly over their shoulders, their deep folds holding the faint, clean scent of the winter air. No one speaks in haste. In this society, silence is treated with the utmost reverence, a fertile ground where wisdom is allowed to mature and settle before words are shaped. The rhythmic, steady crackle of the oak logs and the occasional soft hiss of escaping steam from the wood are the only sounds that puncture the serene environment, creating a soothing, hypnotic rhythm that calms the mind and centers the spirit. The estate bailiff, a man whose family has overseen the storehouses for generations, sits among the farmers as an equal partner in this silent endeavour. He understands completely that the true wealth of the kingdom does not lie in the scarce distant silver coins minted in royal boroughs, but in the bountiful grain bins, the healthy livestock, and the unyielding honesty of the people who tend the soil. Beside him rests a small wooden table, completely empty of the complicated parchment, expensive inkwells and goose quills that the monastic scribes use in the distant abbeys. In the freezing cold of midwinter, ink thickens and freezes in its well, and parchment becomes stiff and unyielding to the touch. The community requires a simpler, more organic approach to governance, one that can be executed by the light of the fire, understood by every member of the village regardless of their ability to read written scripts, and preserved safely against the corrupting influences of dampness, time, and human forgetfulness. As the amber embers pulse with a steady, deep warmth, the oldest of the village elders, a grey-haired farmer whose memory extends back through decades of changing seasons, speaks in a low, resonant voice that carries the weight of undisputed experience. He describes how their ancestors managed great transactions through simple, physical tokens of trust, long before the first royal mints began stamping metal. The discussion drifts like the gentle smoke toward the idea of using the very trees that surround them, the living, breathing wood of their own forests, to serve as the physical keepers of their truth. The elders nod in quiet, rhythmic agreement, their wrinkled faces catching the warm illumination of the fire as they envision a system where a contract is not an abstract concept written in a foreign tongue, but a tangible piece of the earth itself split evenly between two souls. This collective realization brings an immediate, palpable sense of relief to the hall, dissolving the lingering winter anxieties and replacing them with a serene, profound confidence in the ancient, simple ways of the land. The gathering continues late into the night, the slow movement of the stars outside mirrored by the unhurried progression of their shared thoughts. There is a beautiful, timeless symmetry to this moment, a group of dedicated human beings sitting in an ancient stone hall, using their collective wisdom to craft a peaceful solution to a modern crisis using the simplest gifts of nature. The cold world outside, with its impassable high roads and silent rivers, no longer feels like a barrier or a threat. Instead, it has become the very catalyst that forces the community to look inward, to rely upon the enduring strength of mutual respect, and to establish a sanctuary of absolute trust that will guide them safely through the dark heart of the winter season. The dawn arrives with a fragile pale silver clarity, filtering softly through the eastern ridges and illuminating the deep, frost-rimed woodlands that border the village fields. Under this cold, serene canopy, a small group of village woodcarvers and elders makes their way along the familiar forest paths, their steps deliberate and slow, leaving deep, rhythmic impressions in the crisp, undisturbed snow. The forest in winter possesses a cathedral-like stillness, an environment where every sound is magnified, yet immediately absorbed by the dense white mantle covering the forest floor. There is a deep, profound reverence in their mission on this morning, for they are not seeking green timber to burn or rough logs for structural walls, but rather the finest, most perfect specimens of seasoned English oak and hazel, timbers that will soon bear the heavy responsibility of preserving the community's sacred trust. The air inside the woodland is incredibly pure, tasting of sharp frost and the rich, subtle perfume of damp moss and decaying leaves sleeping beneath the frozen ground. As they move deeper into the quiet groves, the majestic forms of ancient oaks rise before them, their massive, gnarled trunks coated in patches of soft green lichen and silver frost that sparkle like tiny diamonds in the early morning light. The searchers pause before a sheltered timber stack, carefully constructed beneath an overhanging rock ledge where the wood has been left to season naturally over many winters. Completely protected from the autumn rains and the summer humidity, the elder stretches out a leather-gloved hand, brushing away a fine dusting of snow to feel the rough, deeply furrowed texture of a seasoned oak branch. To the untrained eye, it is merely a fragment of the forest, but to the experienced woodsman, it is a masterpiece of natural architecture. This oak limb is remarkably heavy, dense, and entirely dry, having lost its sap seasons ago. Its heartwood is strong and unyielding, possessing a remarkably straight, even grain that runs flawlessly from one end to the other, completely free from the twisting spirals or deep knots that would ruin a delicate split. Beside the ancient oaks grow the slender, elegant stands of hazel, a wood celebrated for its unique combination of suppleness and density. The elders examine several long, straight poles of seasoned hazel that have been carefully harvested from the managed coppices during previous years. The bark of the hazel is smooth, with a beautiful silvery grey sheen that catches the pale sunlight, revealing subtle golden undertones beneath the surface. When tapped gently with the back of a small iron knife, the seasoned hazel emits a clear, sharp, ringing tone, a beautiful resonant sound that confirms the interior of the wood is perfectly sound, dry and free from the invisible cracks or rot that moisture leaves behind. This wood is chosen for its remarkable cooperative nature. When split, it yields cleanly and predictably, following the natural fibers of the tree with absolute fidelity. The elders handle each piece of wood with a gentle, appreciative touch, understanding that the physical qualities of these natural materials are directly tied to the success of their new system of record-keeping. Each selected limb is measured not with iron rulers, but by the span of a hand and the intuitive judgment of eyes that have watched the forests grow for half a century. They choose pieces that are approximately the thickness of a traveller's staff and the length of a forearm, proportions that feel comfortable and natural to hold, balanced perfectly in the palm. There is no rush in their work. They select only a handful of the finest pieces, leaving the rest of the timber store undisturbed in its winter sleep. The physical weight of the chosen oak and hazel branches, cold and solid in their arms, brings a quiet sense of purpose to the journey back toward the village. The morning sun climbs just a fraction higher in the sky, its weak warmth doing little to melt the frost, but casting a brilliant, golden glow over the small bundles of wood that now carry the potential to restore order, clarity, and peace to an anxious world. The woodcarvers return to the warmth of the estate workshop, an outbuilding where the air is thick with the scent of wood shavings and dried herbs. A small stone hearth burns quietly, providing just enough soft light to illuminate the workbench. The chosen pieces of seasoned hazel are placed gently onto the wooden surface, scarred by generations of precise craftsmanship. The artisan selects a small, sharp iron blade with a wooden handle, polished smooth by decades of human use. There is no rush in his movements. Each gesture is a product of long tradition. He picks up a straight piece of hazel, turning it slowly, feeling its unique weight and density under his fingers. He looks closely at the flat end of the stick, locating the exact center point where the growth rings ripple outward like waves on a still pond. With absolute concentration, the carver aligns the edge of the iron blade precisely across the center of the wood's cross-section. The blade must divide the stick exactly in half, following a straight line along its length. He rests a small, weighted wooden mallet against the back of the knife blade. The first tap is incredibly gentle, producing a crisp, musical clink that echoes softly through the room. The blade bites into the silvery bark and a tiny fracture appears in the cream-colored wood. The carver pauses, examining the line to ensure it has not deviated from the true center. Satisfied, he delivers a second, firmer blow. The wood opens with a low, satisfying groan, a rhythmic separation of organic fibers that have spent years bound together in the forest. The blade slips deeper, acting as a gentle guide that coaxes the wood to separate along its own natural path. As the knife moves steadily downward, the split travels along the length of the stick with a slow, hypnotic regularity. The inner soul of the wood is exposed to the air for the first time, revealing a hidden architecture of pale gold and rich cream hues. Every tiny variation in the growth rings, every slight wave caused by a long-forgotten summer drought or a wet spring, is preserved with absolute fidelity on both sides of the separation. When the final tap of the mallet fully divides the stick, the two halves settle onto the workbench side by side. They are no longer a single branch, yet they remain deeply, permanently connected by a unique organic geometry that cannot be replicated by any human artifice. The elders and the bailiff observe this transformation with silent reverence. They look at the two pieces, realizing they have witnessed the creation of a perfect, unforgeable contract. The face of each split half is a flawless mirror image of the other. Every grain fiber that rises like a tiny ridge on one piece leaves a corresponding exact indentation on its twin. If anyone were to attempt to alter one of the pieces by shaving away a fraction of the wood, the two halves would instantly refuse to interlock when brought back together. The natural irregularities of the tree's growth serve as an ancient, complex cryptographic key that ensures absolute security. The simplicity of the wooden stick stands as a shield against deceit, far superior to any ink on parchment or any silver coin. The carver lifts the two halves, carefully running his bare thumb along the split surfaces to ensure there are no loose splinters that might ruin the alignment over time. The two pieces fit together with a soft, sliding friction, interlocking so perfectly that the seam between them practically vanishes, restoring the illusion of a solid branch. These two halves will now go on separate journeys, one remaining in the safe custody of the Lord's iron chest, and the other tucked into the woolen pouch of the farmer. Yet no matter how many miles or months separate them, their shared origin within the heart of the forest remains written indelibly in their grain. All stories presented on this channel are global historical tales, gently curated and narrated based on themes such as the rise and fall of nations, human cultures, and extraordinary journeys through time. The heavy oak doors of the grand tithe barn groan softly as they are pushed open, revealing a vast, soaring interior that feels like a quiet sanctuary from the freezing winter world outside. This massive structure, built with heavy timber frames and thick stone foundations, serves as the true heart of the village's survival. Inside, the air is thick and rich with the comforting, deeply nostalgic scents of the late autumn harvest, the sweet, dusty aroma of golden wheat, the earthy fragrance of dried rye, and the sharp, clean scent of stacked barley. High above, the massive timber rafters are lost in the deep shadows of the thatched roof, where centuries of wood smoke have stained the oak a deep, lustrous black. Tiny motes of dust dance lazily in the thin beams of pale winter sunlight that manage to pierce through the small, narrow slits in the limestone walls, lighting up the space with a soft, ethereal glow. Every corner of the barn is filled with the physical evidence of the community's collective labor. Great mounds of unthreshed grain sit in silent piles, waiting for the arrival of spring, while heavy linen sacks packed tightly with grain are stacked neatly against the stone walls, forming long, protective ramparts against the cold drafts that slip beneath the doors. Along the far wall, bundles of raw sheep's wool rest in soft grey heaps, their lanolin scent mixing with the dry fragrance of the straw spread across the dirt floor. There is a profound, comforting weight to this atmosphere. It is a place where time slows down to a crawl, and the frenetic energy of the growing season is entirely replaced by a state of peaceful suspension. The thick walls completely muffle the howling wind outside, reducing the fierce midwinter storm to a distant, gentle whisper that only serves to deepen the sense of absolute safety and quiet comfort within the barn. The village elders and the bailiff move slowly into this tranquil space, their footsteps making a soft rhythmic rustling sound as they walk across the dry straw. They carry with them the newly split tally sticks of seasoned hazel, their pale, freshly exposed inner wood gleaming softly in the dim light of the barn. In the centre of the main floor, a simple wooden table has been set up, surrounded by large wicker baskets and leather measuring pouches. This is the space where the true wealth of the village will be balanced against the silent testimonies of the wooden ledgers. There is no tension here, no loud voices or hurried gestures. The sacred nature of the harvest demands a matching solemnity and calmness from those who oversee its distribution and accounting. As they prepare the table, the sheer physical beauty of the ancient barn becomes more apparent. The massive central pillars, carved from entire oak trees that grew in the ancient forest centuries ago, rise like monolithic guardians, supporting the immense weight of the roof with an easy, timeless strength. The natural irregularities of the wood, the deep cracks, the gnarled burls, and the smooth areas worn down by decades of leaning sacks and handling, tell a story of endurance that mirrors the history of the people who find shelter within its walls. The dry warmth of the earth floor, insulated by layers of compressed straw, radiates a subtle comfort that eases the stiffness in the elders' hands, allowing them to handle the delicate wooden tallies with precision and care. In this quiet environment, the focus shifts entirely to the preservation of truth and the maintenance of harmony. The Grand Tithe Barn is not merely a storehouse for agricultural goods, it is a monument to mutual reliance, a physical manifestation of the invisible bonds that hold the early medieval village together through the harshest trials of nature. Here, surrounded by the abundance of the earth and the quiet dignity of their shared heritage, the community prepares to initiate a system of record-keeping that is as honest, durable, and unyielding as the ancient timbers that shelter them from the winter cold. The quiet rustle of grain being shifted and the low, melodious murmurs of the elders create a soothing backdrop, ensuring that every transaction recorded on this day is steeped in an atmosphere of complete clarity and serene confidence. The heavy iron latch of the tithe barn clicks with a deep, solitary sound that echoes softly through the vast vaulted space, announcing the arrival of the local estate official. He enters not with the harsh, aggressive stride of a tax collector demanding hidden wealth, but with a measured, orderly presence that reflects the structural peace of King Alfred's realm. As the heavy oak door opens just a fraction, a brief, swirling cloud of frosty winter air slips into the barn, catching the thin beams of pale sunlight and causing the dancing dust motes to scatter lazily before the door is gently pulled shut once more. The official, known to the village as the Reeve, pauses for a moment to let his eyes adjust to the soft amber dimness of the interior. He is a man of advanced years, his countenance marked by lines of quiet responsibility and his silver hair neatly combed beneath a hood of thick dark wool. He carries with him an aura of calm authority, an unhurried dignity that immediately reassures the gathered elders that this meeting is not an interrogation, but a collective effort to preserve the social fabric of their community. He steps forward onto the compressed straw of the floor, his heavy leather boots making a soft rhythmic crunching sound that harmonizes with the gentle sighs of the winter wind outside. Around his waist he wears an oiled leather belt from which hangs a ring of heavy brass keys that open the grand storehouses and the estate chests, clinking together with a melodic, metallic chime that speaks of order, security, and meticulous stewardship. He wears a heavy mantle of forest green wool, lined with the soft fleece of local sheep, its deep folds dusted lightly with the fine snow he encountered on the short walk from the manor house. There is no hostility in his gaze as he looks upon the village elders. Instead, there is a deep mutual respect forged through decades of shared seasons, successful harvests, and the collective endurance of harsh winters. He understands that his duty to the manorial lord is perfectly aligned with the well-being of the farmers, for an estate cannot thrive if its people are crushed by suspicion or driven to despair by chaotic accounting. Moving with deliberate grace, the official approaches the long oak table that has been prepared in the centre of the barn. He places his hands, weathered by the elements yet clean and precise in their movements, flat upon the ancient wood, feeling the smooth, polished surface where generations of village leaders have gathered to measure the fruits of the earth. He looks at the neatly arranged rows of seasoned hazel and oak sticks that the carvers have prepared, his eyes showing a quiet appreciation for the elegant simplicity of the tool. In this deep midwinter freeze, traditional methods of literacy are rendered completely useless. The expensive inks imported from distant monasteries have frozen into solid, brittle cakes within their hornwells, and the fine parchment sheets are too stiff and fragile to bear the pressure of a goose quill. The official recognizes that the living grain of the wood before him is the only medium capable of surviving the severity of the season, offering an immutable, tactile ledger that requires no foreign learning to interpret. He sits down upon a low wooden bench, arranging his heavy cloak around him, and invites the elders to join him in the circle of soft light. The atmosphere becomes one of shared purpose and quiet equanimity, a sanctuary where the pressing anxieties of the winter famine begin to dissolve. The official opens a small leather pouch at his side, revealing not the elusive silver coins that have vanished from the trade routes, but his own set of marking tools, small, beautifully balanced knives and smooth sharpening stones. His presence transforms the barn from a simple storehouse into a hall of justice and truth, a place where every bushel of wheat and every bale of wool will be treated with the absolute clarity it deserves. There is a beautiful unspoken contract in his quiet demeanour, a promise that the law of the land is not a weapon of the powerful but a shield for the industrious, carved into the very wood of the forests that shelter them all. The estate official lifts the first pair of split hazel sticks from the oak table, bringing them together face to face so that their inner grains and unique organic ridges interlock completely once more. He holds them firmly in his left hand, his thumb pressing down with a steady, uniform pressure to anchor the wood against the smooth, scarred surface of the table. The gathered village elders lean forward slightly, their eyes tracking his movements with a quiet, respectful focus that mirrors the solemnity of a sacred ritual. In the dim amber atmosphere of the grand tithe barn, the scene is perfectly still, wrapped in a deep winter silence that seems to hold its breath. The official reaches for a small, beautifully balanced iron carving knife, its curved blade polished to a fine, sharp edge that catches the pale silver light filtering through the narrow wall slits. The metal is cool and heavy, forged by the local village blacksmith from bog iron and tempered in cold spring water, designed specifically to cut cleanly through the dense, unyielding fibers of seasoned hardwood without splitting the stick. The tip of the iron blade is positioned carefully across the joined outer bark of the twin tallies. The official pauses for a fraction of a moment, calculating the exact placement to ensure the mark will traverse both halves simultaneously and with absolute symmetry. With a deliberate, measured movement, he presses the blade into the wood, drawing it toward himself with an unhurried, rhythmic grace. A soft, crisp and distinct sound echoes through the vast space beneath the soaring rafters, a resonant, dry scrape as the iron cuts through the silver-grey bark and bites into the cream-coloured heartwood. It is a sound that carries the immense weight of absolute clarity, a clean declaration that an honest transaction is being recorded for prosperity. A tiny, elegant curl of pale hazel wood peels away from the blade, tumbling lazily through the air and landing softly upon the dry straw covering the floor. The elders watch the tiny shaving fall, recognizing that this small fragment of wood represents a massive pile of golden wheat stored safely in the deep bays behind them. The official adjusts the angle of his hand, drawing the knife back in the opposite direction to complete the V-shaped indentation. Once more, the sharp, melodious sound of cutting wood punctures the quiet sanctuary of the barn, a steady pulse that fills the winter stillness with a comforting regularity. Each cut is perfectly uniform, spaced with an intuitive geometric precision that follows an unwritten but universally understood code of regional measurements. The rhythmic song of the knife becomes the heartbeat of the room, a soothing melody that anchors the minds of everyone present. Between each completed notch, there is a deliberate pause, a moment of profound silence where the official and the farmer lock eyes in mutual agreement, silently verifying the count of the grain bushels before the metal touches the wood again. This slow, unhurried pacing ensures that no mistake can slip into the record, and no hurried gesture can disrupt the truth of their shared survival. As the carving progresses, the heat of the friction releases a subtle, pleasant aroma from the dry hazel fibers, a clean, woody fragrance that is faintly sweet, reminding the elders of the deep forest in early spring, now blending beautifully with the heavy, rich scent of threshing dust and old straw that dominates the barn. The physical resistance of the seasoned timber provides immediate, tactile feedback to the official's hand. He can feel the density of the winter growth rings and the smooth, cooperative sections that grew during a long, sun-drenched summer. This natural resistance requires a steady hand and a mastery of pressure, an artistic balance that the official has perfected through years of managing the estate's resources. The resulting notches are beautiful in their stark simplicity, deep, clean-edged triangles that create a bold pattern of light and shadow along the length of the stick, making the record instantly recognizable to both the eye and the searching touch of a thumb. For the farmer standing opposite the table, each rhythmic stroke of the iron blade brings a profound wave of relief and inner peace. He watches his long months of arduous summer labor, the endless days of guiding the heavy wooden plow through thick mud, the burning sweat of the August reaping, and the meticulous winnowing of the ears being translated into a permanent tactile language that cannot be erased by dampness, lost in confusion, or manipulated by an unfair scribe. A large thumb-wide notch represents a score of bushels, a medium one represents a single bushel, and a shallow slit denotes a half measure. The entire complexity of the agricultural year is distilled into this elegant natural alphabet of wood. There is an undeniable beauty in this ancient simplicity, the transformation of abstract obligations into a physical object that a man can carry in his pouch, trust completely, and feel with his bare fingers in the dark of a winter night. The row of freshly carved incisions along the joined edges of the hazel stick reveals a beautiful, silent architecture of lines and shadows. This is the hidden alphabet of the medieval countryside, a tactile language that does not rely on the scratching of ink on fragile parchment or the mastery of complex Latin letters known only to the cloistered monks in distant abbeys. Instead, this system speaks directly to the senses of sight and touch, utilizing a rigorous geometric code that has been passed down through generations of agrarian communities. Each notch, meticulously shaped by the steady hand of the estate official, possesses a specific width, depth, and angle, transforming the simple piece of forest timber into an incorruptible ledger of human labor and material wealth. In the quiet dimness of the tithe barn, the golden light of the tallow candles catches the slopes of these V-shaped cuts, creating a rhythmic pattern of warmth and darkness that reads like a map of the past agricultural season. At the leading end of the tally stick, the official has carved the largest and most profound mark, a deep, broad groove that spans the entire width of an adult man's thumb. This monumental incision signifies the highest unit of measurement within the rural economy, a full score of wheat bushels, representing 20 massive linen sacks filled to the brim with heavy, golden grain. The sides of this major cut are smoothed flat by the edge of the iron knife, exposing the dense, pale inner heartwood of the hazel branch beneath its silvery bark. It is a grounding, comforting mark anchoring the entire contract with its sheer physical presence. Below this thumb-wide groove sit the finger-width notches, each one carved with identical precision to represent single bushels of grain. These single-unit marks are arranged in neat, orderly sequences separated from one another by narrow, untouched ridges of bark that provide a distinct physical boundary that can be easily identified by the searching tip of a human finger. As the official's knife moves further down the length of the cleft timber, the incisions become smaller and more delicate, yet no less clear in their purpose. Slanted, narrow cuts, no wider than the thickness of a small straw, denote the fractional measures, the pecks and half bushels that account for the residual yields of the harvest. These fine lines are carved at a gentle angle, slanting gracefully toward the right to distinguish them instantly from the upright vertical marks of the full bushels. Even the smallest division of agricultural produce is granted its rightful place upon the wood, ensuring that nothing is forgotten and nothing is left to chance. The systematic spacing between the different types of notches creates an intrinsic visual and physical harmony, a design where the size of the void in the wood corresponds perfectly to the magnitude of the wealth it represents. This organic ledger achieves its true brilliance through its absolute accessibility. The illiterate farmer, whose hands are calloused from years of guiding the heavy iron-tipped plough through thick river clay, does not need to understand written scripts to know the exact state of his account. He can sit in the absolute darkness of his small thatch-roofed cottage during a bitter midwinter night, far from the light of any fire or candle, and simply run his bare thumb along the split face of his tally stick. His fingers, deeply attuned to the textures of the physical world, can read the geometry of the incisions with perfect accuracy. He can count the deep thumb widths of his major contributions, trace the neat ridges of his single bushels, and feel the fine slanted lines of his smaller debts. The wood tells him the absolute truth, translating abstract economic numbers into a comforting tactile reality that he can hold securely in his palm. There is a profound sense of peace that arises from this material clarity. In a world where money is scarce and the future is often unpredictable, the durability of the carved wooden stick provides an unyielding shield against anxiety and deceit. The natural grain of the hazel branch, with its unique undulating growth rings that have been split cleanly in two, ensures that the code can never be counterfeited or altered without instant detection. The official and the farmer have created a monument to mutual trust using nothing more than a fragment of the forest and a simple iron blade. The rhythmic sequence of cuts along the stick stands as a beautiful testament to human ingenuity, a silent, elegant solution that honors the dignity of the harvest and preserves the harmony of the community through the darkest, coldest months of the winter season. With the final notch meticulously carved into the combined outer surface of the timber, the estate official gently relaxes the firm grip of his left hand, allowing the twin pieces of seasoned hazel to settle softly onto the scarred surface of the oak table. For a few moments the barn returns to its deep, undisturbed silence, broken only by the rhythmic, distant whispering of the winter wind passing over the thick thatch roof far above. The official looks down at the completed work, a unified length of wood now bearing a precise V-shaped pattern of cuts that binds two separate lives into a single, unshakable agreement. Then, with a slow and deliberate grace, his fingers grasp the ends of the two halves, preparing to execute the most critical stage of this ancient administrative process, the physical separation of the tally into its two complementary components, known to the land as the foil and the counterfoil. He slides the pieces apart horizontally, a movement that produces a soft, sliding friction, a gentle, organic rustle that sounds like dry autumn leaves brushing against one another in a quiet forest clearing. As the two halves pull away, the interlocking fibers of the inner wood slide cleanly out of their corresponding grooves, exposing the pale golden heartwood to the cool air of the barn once more. The single branch is now transformed into two distinct objects, each carrying an identical mirror image sequence of the incisions. The official holds the longer piece, the primary foil, which remains thick and substantial at its base, symbolizing the primary receipt of the grain. He turns it slowly in the pale, flickering candle flame, observing how the deep thumb-width notches and the delicate, slanted lines match perfectly with the vacancies left on its companion piece, the counterfoil, which he holds in his other hand. This structural separation is not a division of purpose, but a multiplication of security, establishing a dual record that requires no central archive or complex keys to protect. The official extends his hand across the table, offering the counterfoil to the smallholder farmer who stands waiting in the calm dimness of the timber sanctuary. The farmer reaches out with a hand calloused by a lifetime of honest labor, his rough fingers closing gently around the smooth, silvery grey bark of his designated piece. The wood is cool to the touch, carrying the lingering crispness of the winter morning, yet it brings an immediate, profound sense of warmth and relief to his mind. As he holds the small piece of hazel, he runs his bare thumb along the fresh, sharp edges of the cuts, feeling the exact geometry of his harvested wealth translated into a physical token. This piece is his shield, his undeniable proof of honesty, and his rightful contribution to the estate's winter stores. He slips the counterfoil carefully into the deep, warm folds of his heavy wool pouch, letting it rest securely against his hip, where it will remain protected from the dampness, the melting snow, and the mud of the winter tracks. Meanwhile, the official takes the primary foil and places it gently into a massive iron-bound oak chest that sits open beside his wooden bench. The interior of this grand chest is dark and redolent with the reassuring scents of old iron, protective beeswax, and dried lavender sprigs, holding dozens of other tally sticks from neighbouring farms, all resting side by side in perfect silent order. The iron hinges of the chest creak softly as the heavy lid is lowered by the official, a resonant, metallic click, sealing the foil away in the darkness where it will sleep securely through the rest of the winter freeze. This separation of the wood creates a beautiful living contract. Though the two pieces are now physically apart, separated by heavy wooden chests and thick cottage walls, they remain fundamentally inseparable in their truth. They wait patiently for the arrival of the spring thaw and the final audit, when they will be brought together once more, interlocking flawlessly to verify that the trust between the people and their leaders has remained perfectly intact through the harshest trials of the season. The inner architecture of the split hazel branch reveals a hidden landscape of incomparable complexity, a magnificent microscopic wilderness of ridges, furrows, and delicate, overlapping fibers that no human hand or tool could ever hope to replicate. When the woodcarver gently cleaved the timber along its natural grain, the separation was not a flat geometric cut like that made by a sharp metal saw blade. A saw forces its way through the wood, destroying the natural alignment and leaving behind a smooth, featureless plane that carries no memory of the tree's life. Instead, the split was an organic tearing, a slow and respectful pulling apart of the living cells that had spent years binding themselves together under the changing skies of the Wessex hills. This natural cleavage follows the path of least resistance between the wood's cellular walls, creating a highly irregular, three-dimensional topography on the face of each split half. Every tiny bundle of cellulose fibers that lifts slightly away from one surface leaves a corresponding perfectly proportioned valley on the opposing face. It is an intricate puzzle crafted by nature herself, where every microscopic hill has its exact matching hollow, a masterwork of biological design that serves as an absolute guarantee of communal honesty. As the pale winter light catches the exposed face of the counterfoil, the intricate story of the tree's growth becomes visible in the undulating patterns of the grain. The wood preserves a flawless, chronological diary of the seasons it survived in the ancient woodlands. Wide, pale bands of soft cream-coloured wood speak of warm, sun-drenched summers when the rains were plentiful and the sap flowed vigorously through the outer rings, expanding the tree's boundaries with a joyful, rapid growth. Alternating with these generous bands are the narrow, dense, and darker lines of the winter growth, periods when the frost locked the earth in an icy grip and the tree fell into a deep, protective sleep, concentrating its strength into a tight, rock-hard defense against the elements. These varying densities create an unpredictable wave-like texture across the split face. When the two halves of the tally stick are brought back together, these natural variations act like an organic lock and key. The slightest misalignment, even by the thickness of a single hair, causes the wood fibers to collide rather than interlock, preventing the two pieces from forming a seamless, singular branch once more. This absolute structural fidelity provides a level of security that far surpasses the sophisticated ledgers of distant royal treasuries or the complex seals of monastic scholars. In an era where a clever forge might alter a stroke of ink on a piece of parchment, or a dishonest trader might clip the edges of a silver penny to steal a fraction of its precious weight, the cleft hazel stick remains entirely incorruptible. If a deceitful individual were to attempt to alter the record by shaving away a fraction of a millimeter from the face of his stick to falsely diminish a debt, the balance would be permanently destroyed. The hills of the altered stick would no longer find their matching valleys on the companion piece held in the Lord's secure chest. When brought together at the spring audit, the two pieces would stubbornly refuse to unite. They would rattle against one another, leaving a visible, telling gap of empty air where the natural fibers should have nested in perfect, silent harmony. The fraud would be exposed instantly to the eyes and fingers of the village elders, convicted by the silent testimony of the forest itself. The simplicity of this system is its greatest strength, erecting an unyielding shield of truth around the economic life of the isolated hamlet. It democratizes justice, placing the power of verification directly into the calloused hands of the people who cultivate the land. The illiterate farmer, who may never learn to read the characters of a written language, possesses an intuitive, masterful understanding of the textures of the material world. He knows the feel of healthy soil, the weight of mature grain, and the unique, resilient grain of the trees that shelter his family. By relying on the unalterable geometry of the split wood, the community establishes a sanctuary of absolute trust that is completely immune to the sophisticated deceptions of the world beyond the snowdrifts. The tally stick becomes an emblem of peace, a physical manifestation of a sacred contract that rests safely in the pouch of the provider and the chest of the receiver, bound together by the eternal, honest laws of the natural world. The success of the wooden tally system within the grain stores naturally encourages its elegant expansion to the other great source of wealth in the Wessex hills, the soft fleece harvests. In this rural economy, where silver coinage is a distant memory, the wool of the sheep is treated with a reverence equal to that of the golden grain, for it provides the essential warmth that shields the community from the cruelest bites of the winter season. The journey of this material wealth begins long before the first snows of winter fall, high upon the misty hillside pastures where the village flocks spend their days grazing under the vast, changing skies. These rolling downlands, carpeted in thick, resilient wild grasses and dotted with yellow gorse, provide the perfect nourishment for the hardy sheep. In the early mornings of spring and summer, a soft, ethereal mist clings to the valleys, rising slowly as the sun climbs, revealing the scattered white forms of the flock moving peacefully across the hillsides, their movements guided by the gentle, rhythmic tinkle of the bellwether's copper collar. When the warmth of high summer reaches its peak, the community gathers for the great shearing, a seasonal ritual that demands patience, coordination, and a gentle touch. The sheep are brought down from the high ridges into stone-lined washing pools along the riverbanks, where the cool, clear water cleanses the heavy wool coats of the dust and debris accumulated over the months. Once dried in the warm summer breezes, the animals are brought to the shade of large orchard trees, where the wood carvers and shepherds work side by side with large, spring-loaded iron shears. The sound of the shears is a steady, rhythmic snip-snip that punctuates the warm afternoon air as the thick, grease-heavy fleeces are removed in single, unbroken blankets of soft fibre. Each fleece is handled with care, rolled from the edges inward to preserve its cleanliness and packed tightly into large canvas sacks woven from local hemp, ready for the journey to the manor's central storage chambers. Now, in the deep heart of winter, these precious fleece harvests are nestled securely within the upper lofts and dry interior chambers of the estate buildings. The air in these dedicated rooms is incredibly distinct, thick with the rich, heavy scent of natural lanolin, the sheep's oil that repels moisture, and the subtle, grassy aroma of dried summer pastures that still clings to the deep fibres of the wool. Large, pale grey bundles are stacked in neat geometric tiers that rise from the dark oak floorboards up toward the heavy roof timbers, creating a dense barrier that insulates the room against the freezing drafts outside. There is a profound stillness in these lofts. The heavy wool acts as a natural acoustic blanket. absorbing all external sound and creating an oasis of absolute quietude where the passing hours seem to dissolve without notice. It is here, by the soft illumination of a horn lantern, that the official and the shepherds gather to apply the split-stick accounting system to their textile treasure. For the wool ledger, the woodcarvers select beautiful, slender sticks of seasoned oak, a timber whose density matches the long-term endurance of the woven fabric. The notches carved for the fleece harvest follow a specialized code known to all the weavers and spinners of the district. A deep, wide crosscut along the joined sticks denotes a full sack of wool, a measure known as a tod, weighing 28 pounds of pure sorted fibre. Smaller, circular indentations created by rotating the point of a small iron knife against the wood represent individual fleeces of exceptional quality, such as those harvested from the prized young lambs. The smooth, rhythmic movement of the blade as it shapes these custom marks produces a soft, comforting sound that blends perfectly with the quiet rustle of the wool sacks, reinforcing the sense of orderly security that now blankets the entire village administration. As the shepherd accepts his carved counterfoil from the reeve, his fingers trace the clean, sharp depressions that validate his months of constant vigilance on the exposed hillsides. He remembers the cold nights spent protecting the ewes from wild predators and the long walks through summer downpours to keep the flock united. Every drop of sweat and every hour of dedication is now preserved in the immutable architecture of the oak stick. He slips the tally into his leather pouch with a quiet sense of satisfaction, knowing that his labour has been weighed fairly and recorded beautifully in a medium that fears neither time nor deception. The expanding network of wooden ledgers brings an unshakable peace to the community, proving that even when the winter isolates them from the wider world, their internal trust remains as rich, durable, and comforting as the heavy fleeces that rest in the silent storage rooms. A palpable wave of tranquility washes over the small agricultural hamlet as the twilight deepens into a magnificent, starry winter night. The heavy, invisible burdens of administrative anxiety that had weighed so deeply upon the shoulders of the hard-working farmers begin to lift, dissolving like the thin wisps of wood smoke that disperse into the vast clear sky. For weeks, a subtle undercurrent of unease had lingered within the low-ceilinged timber homes, a silent worry that the absence of royal silver and the closure of the trade routes would leave their honest summer labours unrecorded and vulnerable to the passage of time. But now, with the graceful introduction of the split hazel and oak tally sticks, that profound sense of vulnerability has been completely replaced by an unshakable, quiet confidence. The community has looked into the very heart of their native forests and found an elegant material answer to their modern crisis, securing their livelihoods with a tool that is as simple as it is completely incorruptible. In the modest cottages that line the snow-choked village lanes, the evening routines are now bathed in an atmosphere of deep, restored harmony. Families gather closely around their central stone hearths, where the dancing amber flames of seasoned ash logs cast a warm, flickering glow across the smooth dirt floors and the rough-hewn wooden walls. The bubbling pots of winter pottage, thick with dried peas, leeks, and salted root vegetables, fill the small spaces with a rich, comforting aroma that speaks of abundance and survival. On the small trestle tables beside the fire, the carved wooden counterfoils rest openly, their pale, freshly incised notches catching the soft illumination of the embers. These sticks are no longer just pieces of forest timber. They have become sacred symbols of peace, physical manifestations of an undeniable truth that a man can hold in his hand and protect within his own home. As the village settles into this beautiful era of deep, unshakable trust, we take a soft moment to welcome you on this journey. If these historical narratives bring comfort, clarity, and calm to your evening, you are gently invited to subscribe to our platform, leave a like on this story, and share these peaceful tales with those who desire a restful night. Your quiet support helps us continue to weave these historical sanctuaries of sleep and education, guiding minds into a state of serene relaxation. The lingering fear of miscalculation or unfairness, which had previously hung over the community like a persistent frost, vanishes entirely from the conversations of the elders. They realize that their entire economic existence is now anchored to a medium that requires no foreign learning, no expensive parchments, and no complex scripts to decipher. The illiterate ploughman and the estate bailiff stand on entirely equal ground, both possessing an identical half of the same living branch, both capable of verifying the truth with a simple movement of their fingers. There is an immense, stabilizing dignity in this realization. It reinforces the ancient truth that human societies thrive best when their systems of justice and accountability are accessible, transparent, and deeply rooted in the materials of the earth they cultivate. Outside the thick mud and wattle walls, the winter landscape continues its slow, majestic freeze, but the interior of the hamlet has become an unassailable sanctuary of mental and spiritual peace. Neighbours who had previously viewed each other with subtle, unspoken concern over borrowed grains or promised fleeces now share a deep, quiet companionship, their mutual respect fully restored by the physical clarity of the wooden ledgers. The elderly granary keepers no longer need to worry about their fading charcoal marks on the damp stone walls, and the weavers can look upon their heavy bundles of yarn with a serene confidence that their winter labour has been weighed fairly. The entire village sleeps with a profound sense of security, wrapped in the comforting knowledge that their honour, their labour, and their shared survival are written safely in the imperishable grain of the tally sticks, resting quietly beneath the watchful eyes of the stars. The deep winter night settles over the valley of Wessex with a majestic, unhurried solemnity, wrapping the entire landscape in a profound, velvety darkness that seems to suspend the very passage of time. Outside the sturdy walls of the agricultural hamlets, the intense biting cold purifies the air, stripping away the lingering mists of twilight and leaving the atmosphere perfectly clear, crisp, and still. The snow-covered hillsides reflect the faint natural luminescence of the night sky, casting a soft ethereal glow across the sleeping earth. There is no motion in the valley. The trees stand as silent, dark sentinels frozen in place, their branches completely unmoving against the deep obsidian canvas of the heavens. The world has retreated inward, abandoning the frozen highroads and the icy riverbanks to the ancient elemental forces of nature, leaving the human settlements to sleep in absolute security beneath their thick mantles of protective thatch. High above the silent hamlets, the celestial sphere performs its timeless nocturnal dance, with a slow, magnificent grace that mirrors the enduring nature of the land below. Countless brilliant stars like fine diamonds scattered across dark silk wheel slowly around the singular unmoving point of the northern star, marking the deep hours of the midwinter season with an architectural precision. The ancient constellations, known to generations of ploughmen and stargazers, crawl lazily across the horizon, their shifting positions signalling the slow, inevitable progress of the winter solstice toward the promise of a distant spring. This celestial clock requires no human maintenance and suffers no earthly distortions. It moves with an unhurried, rhythmic constancy that brings a sense of deep, primordial peace to the world below. The starlight filters down through the clear, freezing air, washing over the stone walls of the manor house and silvering the heavy oak roofs with a brilliant, crystalline frost that sparkles silently in the midnight quietude. Beneath this brilliant wheeling canopy of stars, the stone manor house stands as a fortress of absolute stillness and sanctuary. In the main hall, the grand hearth fire has burned down to a low pulsing bed of deep crimson embers which radiate a soft, ambient warmth that pushes back the creeping chill of the night. The wisps of smoke have cleared, leaving the massive, blackened ceiling timbers to rest in the comfortable shadows. Far removed from the empty hall within the small private strong room of the estate, the atmosphere is defined by a cool, clean dryness that is perfectly suited for the preservation of historical artifacts. A single narrow window slit allows a thin ray of pure starlight to pierce the darkness, illuminating the smooth stone floor and casting a long, pale shadow behind the room's most precious furniture, the great administrative chests of the manorial lord. Within the deepest, most secure corner of this ancient chamber rests the primary repository of the village's collective honour and wealth. This massive chest, constructed from thick, slow-grown planks of English oak that were cured for decades before being assembled, is bound in heavy hand-forged straps of black iron. The iron bands, hammered into shape by the local blacksmith over an open forge, cross the wooden surface in a protective geometric grid, fastened tightly with thick iron rivets that have darkened with age and beeswax. The heavy iron lock, an intricate piece of early medieval engineering, is cool to the touch, its internal mechanisms resting in a state of silent, unyielding vigilance. Inside this dark, secure vault, the primary foils of the wooden tally sticks lie stacked in perfect, harmonious order, arranged side by side like sleeping guardians of the harvest. There is a beautiful, almost sacred peace that envelopes this repository during the long hours of the midwinter night. The air inside the chest is incredibly rich and evocative, carrying the deep, woody perfume of the seasoned hazel and oak sticks, mixed with the clean, medicinal scent of dried lavender sprigs and meadowsweet that the officials scattered between the rows to repel the winter dampness and protect the wood from the boring insects. Each tally stick rests horizontally in its designated position, its newly carved V-shaped notches hidden in the dark yet perfectly preserved within the interlocking grain of the wood. These pieces of timber are the physical anchors of the community's social peace. While the farmers sleep in their cottages and the cattle rest in their warm stables, these silent wooden ledgers hold the absolute truth of every debt, every tribute, and every contribution secure against the corrupting influences of forgetfulness or deceit. The external world may freeze, and the political fortunes of kings may shift, but within the dark safety of the iron-bound chest, the record remains fixed, honest, and completely incorruptible, waiting patiently for the inevitable return of the spring sun. The adaptable nature of the cleft timber ledgers proves its ultimate worth when the village elders turn their slow, methodical attention from the silent, static grain bins to the living, breathing wealth of the community, the livestock. In the deep architecture of the 9th century agrarian economy, the preservation of the animal herds through the leanest months of the winter is a matter of absolute survival, requiring a careful balance of resources and a flawless system of accounting. The cattle and swine are not merely commodities, they are the literal engine of the fields, the future providers of milk, meat, and the vital power needed to pull the heavy iron-tipped ploughs through the stubborn river clay when the spring finally arrives. As the frost thickens on the landscape, the village reeve and the master herd keepers move together through the low-ceilinged byres and sheltered pens, carrying with them new, heavy tallies of seasoned ash wood to document the living capital that will sustain the settlement's future. Inside the long stone cattle byres, the atmosphere is instantly warm, dense and thick with a comforting primal serenity that stands in sharp contrast to the biting chill of the open hills. The walls, constructed from thick layers of fieldstone and insulated with packed turf, completely isolate the interior from the howling winter winds. Underfoot, a deep bedding of clean, dry straw absorbs the dampness, releasing a faint, sweet fragrance that mixes with the rich, heavy scent of the animals' coats. The great oxen and breeding cows stand in long, orderly rows, their massive bodies radiating a steady, ambient heat that fills the entire structure. There is a beautiful, hypnotic rhythm to the space, dominated by the low, continuous sound of the cattle chewing their cud. A slow, grinding cadence that speaks of deep contentment and quiet safety. The animals' breath rises from their damp muzzles in soft, regular plumes of pale mist, catching the dim, golden light of the horn lanterns suspended from the heavy oak rafters overhead. The tracking of these animals requires a far more complex tactile language than that used for dead weights of wheat or wool, for a living herd is constantly changing, vulnerable to the elements, and representing different tiers of future value. For this task, the woodcarvers prepare sturdier sticks of seasoned ash, a wood celebrated for its unique toughness and its ability to hold intricate, fine details without splintering under the pressure of a blade. The code designed for the livestock registry utilizes a sophisticated system of symbolic geometry. A deep horizontal notch that cuts completely across both halves of the joined stick represents a mature, milk-bearing cow or a full-grown draft ox. To denote the precious young yearlings and calves, the vulnerable offspring, whose survival is watched with anxious devotion, the official utilizes the sharp point of an iron awl, rotating it with a slow, firm pressure to create a series of small, perfectly circular pits along the grain line. The inspection process is conducted with a quiet, unhurried solemnity that respects the dignity of the animals. The master oxherd guides the reeve from stall to stall, pausing before each beast to verify its health, its age, and its specific designation within the manorial registry. As each animal is accounted for, the iron knife bites into the ash timber with a dull, solid click that punctuates the warm quietude of the byre. This rhythmic crafting of the living ledger ensures that when the spring auditing takes place, every farmer who has entrusted his beast to the communal winter stables will receive his exact animals back without risk of substitution or dispute. The physical tally stick holds the absolute truth of the herd's composition, rendering the numbers immutable against the trickery of memory or the confusion that can so easily arise over months of dark winter isolation. Similarly, the village swine who spent the vibrant days of autumn foraging for acorns and beechmast in the deep ancient oak forests are now safely numbered and recorded within their timber-framed winter enclosures. The heavy sows, carrying the vital promise of spring litters, are granted individual marks upon the wood, ensuring that their specialized feed allotments are guaranteed by the estate administration. As the herd keeper accepts his carved counterfoil from the official, his rough fingers trace the sequence of deep lines and circular hollows with a profound sense of inner peace. He knows that though the winter may be long and the snowdrifts may hide the pastures, the legal existence and value of his living charges are safely anchored to the organic fibers of the ash branch. The community rests secure in the knowledge that their future prosperity is fully documented, wrapped in an unyielding mantle of order, transparency, and serene trust. The legal and administrative landscape of late 9th century Wessex is shaped by the far-reaching, visionary mind of King Alfred the Great, a monarch who understood that the true endurance of a kingdom lies not merely in the strength of its fortifications, but in the unyielding justice of its laws and the systematic cultivation of domestic peace. In the decades preceding this quiet winter, the land had known great turbulence, yet through deliberate, unhurried governance, a profound structural stability has been woven into the fabric of daily life. At the heart of this transformation is the King's Great Law Code, the Doom Book, a monumental compilation that synthesizes the ancient customs of Kent, Mercia, and Wessex into a unified, harmonious system of justice. This legal framework is not an abstract instrument of state power used to subjugate the populace. Rather, it is designed as a moral anchor, a sacred covenant that seeks to establish a sanctuary of truth, equity, and absolute clarity across every corner of the realm, from the bustling royal boroughs to the most isolated agrarian hamlets buried beneath the midwinter snows. Alfred's administrative philosophy is deeply rooted in the concept of decentralized trust and mutual accountability, a system that empowers local communities to govern their own affairs while remaining bound to a higher standard of moral and legal rectitude. The king recognized that in a vast, predominantly illiterate society where communication is slow and physical currency is remarkably scarce, justice must be portable, transparent, and entirely accessible to the ordinary people who tend the soil. To achieve this, the kingdom is organized into a neat hierarchy of shires, hundreds, and tithings, small, localized groupings of families who are legally and spiritually responsible for one another's conduct and economic obligations. Within this tight framework, an individual's sacred oath is treated as the ultimate measure of their character and legal standing. The law does not require complex bureaucratic oversight to function. Instead, it relies upon the internal vigilance of the community, where every neighbor serves as a witness to the truth, and every transaction is subjected to the collective scrutiny of the village elders gathered around the local hearth. This environment of structural honesty provides the perfect ideological fertile ground for the flourishing of the split wooden tally sticks, while the royal scriptoriums in Winchester are filled with the soft scratching sounds of goose quills moving across expensive sheepskin parchments, and the air is thick with the scent of melted beeswax used to seal formal royal charters. The King's Law explicitly validates and honors the simple, non-monetary agreements forged by his ordinary subjects. The legal validity of a contract does not depend upon the presence of Latin phrases or elaborate ink signatures that the common man cannot read. It depends entirely upon the presence of truth and the mutual consent of the participating parties. A cleft piece of hazel or oak timber, split cleanly down the center and carved with precise geometric notches, fits flawlessly into this legal landscape. It is a physical manifestation of the king's peace, an unalterable tactile record that ensures the humble ploughman is protected from the arbitrary exactions of a dishonest official, and the manorial lord is guaranteed his rightful dues. The concept of the king's peace, or frith, blankets the frozen kingdom like the deep, silent midwinter snow, creating a profound sense of safety and order that allows the rural population to rest without fear. This peace is not maintained through the presence of standing armies or aggressive policing, but through the deep internal alignment of the law with the natural order of the world. The laws of Alfred are designed to mirror the divine harmony of the cosmos, emphasizing restitution over retribution and clarity over confusion. When the village reeve sits at the oak table in the grand tithe barn, carving notches into the seasoned timber, he is acting as an extension of the king's own judicial mind, bringing the majestic order of the royal court into the intimate, rustic confines of the agricultural storehouse. The rhythmic clicking of the iron knife against the wood is the very sound of the law at work, a gentle, steady cadence that reassures the community that their labor is valued, their rights are secure, and their society is governed by an enduring framework of absolute honesty. As the deep night continues its slow, majestic progression over the valleys of Wessex, this pervasive legal security allows the inhabitants of the isolated hamlets to sleep in absolute tranquility. They know that their world is bound by an invisible yet unbreakable web of law and trust that survives even the harshest trials of the winter freeze. The tally sticks resting in their woolen pouches and iron-bound chests are not merely financial tools. They are instruments of a high civilization, beautiful in their simplicity and unyielding in their commitment to the truth. Beneath the watchful eyes of the wheeling constellations, the early medieval countryside rests in perfect, ordered quietude, a testament to a visionary king who understood that true peace is carved not with swords, but with the quiet tools of justice, mutual reliance, and the enduring honesty of the human heart. A few miles from the agrarian hamlet, nestled within a sheltered valley where the winter mist hangs low over the frozen willow trees, the stone walls of a Benedictine monastery rise in quiet, solemn isolation. Inside the scriptorium, the high-arched room where the monastic chroniclers spend their daylight hours, a profound and holy silence reigns supreme, broken only by the faint, rhythmic scratching of goose quills moving across sheets of taut calfskin parchment. The air here is cold and exceptionally still, carrying the distinct sharp scents of oak gall ink, dried iron sulfate, and the sweet, waxy aroma of burning tallow candles that provide a fragile, flickering illumination to the writing desks. A single monk, Brother Benedict, sits wrapped in a heavy mantle of undyed coarse black wool, his fingers stiff from the biting chill as he pauses to breathe a soft plume of white mist onto his hands before lowering his reed pen back into the dark inkwell. Today his task is not the transcription of sacred liturgical texts or the illumination of golden gospels, but the recording of the local regional history, a duty that has recently brought him to the village tithe barn to witness the unique system of the split wooden tally sticks. To the eyes of a scholar trained in the classical traditions of Rome and the complex administrative arts of the Frankish courts, the rustic wooden sticks might initially seem like primitive, unlettered tools of the uneducated peasantry. Yet, as Brother Benedict dipped his pen and began to compose his Latin sentences upon the page, his mind perceived a deep, magnificent philosophy hidden within the organic fibers of the cleft hazel wood. He saw that the split tally stick was not a sign of a backwards culture, but a beautiful material manifestation of the highest theological and philosophical principles of truth, equity, and cosmic order. In his chronicle, which he titled with an unhurried, elegant script as The Annals of the Silent Land, he noted down how the natural geometry of the tree's growth rings provided a far more secure foundation for justice than any human document could ever hope to achieve. He wrote of how a single branch, created by the unseen hands of Providence to grow straight and true under the sun and rain, could be divided without ever losing its fundamental spiritual unity. The monk's eyes, long accustomed to analysing the subtle variations of handwritten letters, filled with a quiet admiration as he reflected on the absolute symmetry of the foil and the counterfoil. On the smooth parchment before him, he drew a delicate illustration of the two interlocking pieces of wood, using fine strokes of his quill to capture the way the V-shaped incisions traversed the joined bark. He wrote in his fluid, measured prose that the physical reconciliation of the two halves was a living metaphor for the ultimate restoration of divine balance in the universe. When the farmer and the official brought their respective pieces together, watching the unique, jagged ridges slip perfectly into their corresponding hollows with a soft, organic click, it mirrored the way truth itself reveals itself through the alignment of honest testimonies. There was no room for falsehood in this system, the monk noted, for the wood possessed an inherent, incorruptible memory that utterly refused to cooperate with deceit, standing as an unyielding witness to the sacredness of a man's spoken word. The environment of the scriptorium, with its high stone walls and narrow leaded glass windows, creates a serene frame for these philosophical meditations. Outside, the great snowdrifts stack high against the monastery cloister, insulating the sacred spaces from the noise and turbulence of the secular world. The weak, silver winter sun moves with an unhurried pace across the sky, casting long geometric shadows of the window frames across the stone floorboards. Within this sanctuary of quiet thought, Brother Benedict continues his writing, his soul deeply comforted by the realization that true wisdom does not require the accumulation of vast libraries or the mastery of complex foreign languages. The simple, unlettered people of the Wessex hills had looked directly into the heart of the creation, using the common gifts of the forest to fashion an instrument of absolute justice that honored the dignity of every human soul and preserved the peaceful harmony of the realm under the watchful eye of the Creator. As the afternoon light begins to fade into a soft violet twilight, the chronicler carefully lifts his heavy iron rule, placing it across the damp page to ensure the text remains perfectly aligned. The ink shines with a wet, dark luster in the candle flame, a permanent monument to a passing historical moment. The monk rests his chin in his hand, looking out at the silent, snow-shrouded woodlands that stretch toward the horizon, understanding that the trees are more than just shelter or fuel. They are the silent scribes of the earth, holding within their dense secret heartwood the eternal ledger of human honesty and the quiet, unyielding order of a well-governed world. The great stone manor house sits wrapped in the absolute motionless heart of the midwinter freeze, its massive walls acting as a barrier against the bitter elements that reign over the Wessex countryside. Outside, the night is a silent expanse of deep drifted snow and crystalline frost, but within the thick limestone corridors, daily life has slowed to an unhurried, rhythmic cadence focused entirely on preservation, order, and the quiet maintenance of life. In this early medieval world, the management of a great estate during January requires a meticulous, slow-paced vigilance, ensuring that every resource harvested under the summer sun is guarded with the utmost care. The daily movements of the household are deliberate and gentle, stripped of the frantic energy of the warmer months, and replaced by a profound, comforting silence that settles into every corner of the ancient timber and stone halls. At the centre of this domestic sanctuary is the great hearth, an immense stone structure where the preservation of the fire is treated with the reverence of a sacred daily ritual. As the evening hours draw to a close and the household prepares for sleep, the master of the hearth begins the delicate process of banking the fire. This is not the extinguishing of the flames, but a skillful, artistic coaxing of the fire into a state of safe, suspended animation. Using a long-handled iron shovel, he gently rakes the glowing crimson coals together into a tight, dense mound in the center of the hearth. These embers, radiating a deep, pulsing amber warmth, hold the vital life of the household within their brilliant cores. With slow, rhythmic movements, he covers the glowing mound with a thick, uniform layer of fine grey ash, sealing the heat inside and protecting the coals from the cool night drafts. Beneath this insulating blanket, the fire will sleep peacefully through the long, freezing hours, breathing slowly and keeping the spark alive until the morning light demands its rebirth. While the embers sleep, the focus of the estate's administration shifts to the quiet, dark undercrofts and stone larders that run beneath the main hall. Here, the bailiff and the estate mistress conduct the slow, methodical audit of the winter provisions, an exercise in survival that determines the stability of the entire community. They move down the cool, damp stone steps with unhurried grace, carrying a single horn lantern that casts a soft golden illumination across the vaulted storage chambers. The air down here is incredibly rich and redolent with the complex, comforting scents of a successful harvest season. The sharp, savoury aroma of smoked hams hanging from the beams, the rich, buttery fragrance of aged cheese wheels resting on clean straw shelves, and the deep, earthy perfume of root vegetables packed tightly into dry sand bins. The auditing process is a quiet dance of tactile verification, relying entirely upon oscillant testimony of the wooden tally sticks. The bailiff holds the estate's primary foils, their carved V-shaped notches catching the flickering light of the lantern as his fingers trace each line. They pause before the great oak barrels containing salted pork and pickled fish, comparing the physical count of the remaining containers with the geometry inscribed upon the wood weeks before. There is a deep, profound satisfaction in this meticulous cross-referencing. Every notch on the seasoned hazel and ash sticks corresponds exactly to a tangible reserve of sustenance, proving that the calculated survival plan is unfolding precisely as intended. The slow, rhythmic counting of the barrels and the quiet murmur of agreement between the officials create a soothing, melodic backdrop that reinforces the absolute order and security of the estate. This thorough examination extends to the furthest corners of the cellars, where the heavy earthenware jars of honey, orchard fruits, and medicinal dried herbs are neatly catalogued. Every item is granted its rightful value, tracked not by volatile memories or fragile sheets of paper, but by the immutable physical archives of the split timber. As the audit draws to a successful close, the bailiff wraps the wooden sticks carefully in a square of oiled leather, returning them to their secure iron-bound repository. The lantern is extinguished, leaving the subterranean chambers to return to their natural, cool darkness. Upstairs, the manor house stands in perfect, ordered peace, warmed by the hidden life of the banked embers and protected by the flawless clarity of its wooden ledgers, allowing every inhabitant to rest in the deep, serene knowledge that their winter security is entirely absolute. Within the intimate warmth of the village weaving cottages, another crucial dimension of early medieval domestic production unfolds with a gentle, hypnotic regularity. While the grand tithe barns hold the community's agricultural wealth in silent storage, these smaller spaces are alive with the quiet, creative industries that transform the raw fibers of the earth into the protective fabrics of human life. At the center of this winter industry is the processing of flax, a resilient plant harvested during the golden weeks of late summer, whose stalks have been meticulously dried, soaked, and beaten to reveal a secret inner treasure of fine silver-grey fibers. Now in the deep heart of the midwinter freeze, the soft rhythmic hum of the spinning wheels and the steady, resonant clack of the heavy wooden looms form the soothing melody of the household economy, an auditory testament to the constant patient labour that keeps the bitter cold at bay. The weaver's cottage is an environment of intense focus and material beauty, lit by the steady amber glow of tallow candles and the pulsing warmth of a well-tended hearth fire. The air inside is thick with the clean, distinctive scent of dried linen, natural linseed oil used to treat the wooden machinery, and the faint, earthy aroma of unspun flax hanging in soft, cloudy bundles from the rafters. The great warp-weighted loom dominates the space, its massive vertical frame constructed from sturdy timbers of wild cherry wood, polished smooth by decades of friction and the gentle touch of grease-stained hands. Long uniform threads of hand-spun linen hang vertically from the upper beam, kept perfectly taut by the heavy, teardrop-shaped loom weights carved from local grey clay or smooth river stones. The weaver moves before this loom with a practiced ancestral grace, her hands guiding the wooden shuttle back and forth through the opening threads with a hypnotic, effortless agility. With each pass of the shuttle, the wooden device makes a soft, sliding hiss as it glides between the linen threads, immediately followed by the deep, satisfying thud of the heavy wooden batten striking upward to compact the newly woven weft into a tight, durable fabric. This rhythmic sequence, the slide of the wood, the clack of the loom, the low hum of the spindle, creates a soothing, meditative atmosphere that defines the long winter afternoons. The resulting linen cloth is remarkably strong, beautiful in its natural, unbleached hues of soft oatmeal and pale cream, waiting to be fashioned into garments, grain sacks, and protective bedding for the entire district. This steady production is not just a domestic chore, it is an accumulation of tangible wealth, a vital contribution to the estate's welfare that requires its own specialized system of material accounting to ensure absolute fairness. To track this delicate textile production, the wood carvers prepare smaller, more specialized tally sticks crafted from the branches of seasoned willow, a wood chosen for its lightweight nature and its fine, tight grain that allows for incredibly close spacing of marks. The code used for the weaver's ledger is distinct from the heavy markings of the grain and livestock tallies. A long, shallow groove running lengthwise along the outer edge of the split willow branch denotes a full bolt of woven linen, a standard measurement stretching 24 cubits in length. Finer, vertical incisions, carved with the delicate tip of a small iron knife, indicate the quality of the weave, distinguishing the coarse, heavy canvas used for agricultural utility from the fine, densely packed linens destined for the manorial household or the local church altar. The carver works slowly by the fireside, the crisp sound of the blade moving through the pale willow wood, blending harmoniously with the clacking of the loom. When the weaver completes a bolt of cloth, the estate official arrives to verify the work, bringing his primary foil to match against the weaver's counterfoil. The two pieces of willow are joined, their split inner faces interlocking with a perfect, seamless precision that validates the integrity of the record. As the official carves the new marks across the seam, the weaver watches with a deep, serene sense of accomplishment, her fingers later tracing the fresh incisions with absolute peace of mind. Her months of patient spinning and weaving, measured by the millions of rhythmic strokes of her loom, are now safely secured in an immutable, tactile object that she can keep within her home. The wooden tally system once again proves its universal utility, knitting together the diverse labours of the village into a beautiful tapestry of shared trust, order, and quiet survival through the darkest season of the year. Outside the thick protective walls of the village tithe barns and the comforting warmth of the weaving cottages, the wider natural world lies bound in a magnificent glittering sleep. The village orchards, which in the hazy, sun-drenched days of late summer were heavy with the sweet, perfume-laden weight of ripening red apples and dark, heirloom pears, now stand in a state of pristine crystalline grace. The ancient gnarled trunks of the fruit trees are coated in a thick, uniform armour of silver hoarfrost that sparkles intensely under the pale, low-hanging winter sun. Each delicate, dormant bud containing the secret microscopic blueprint for the next spring's white blossoms is encased in a tiny, perfect sphere of clear ice that catches the morning light like a precious gem. The long, elegant branches, stripped entirely of their summer leaves, stretch upward toward the cold, pale blue sky in absolute stillness, completely unmoving even as a stray winter breeze whispers softly through the rows of trees. The ground beneath the orchard canopy is covered by a dense, undisturbed blanket of deep snow, hiding the fallen leaves and decayed fruits of the previous season, turning the entire orchard into a silent, sacred cathedral of pure white and muted silver tones. This profound freeze is not a symptom of death or permanent decay, but rather a deeply necessary restorative pause in the eternal life cycle of the English countryside. The early medieval farmers who cultivate these lands understand with an ancestral wisdom that the earth, much like a weary human body after a long day of arduous labour, requires a period of deep, undisturbed rest to recover its vital energies. The great open fields of the village which produced the bounty of grain now stored safely within the timber barns lie completely fallow beneath the winter mantle. The long, deep furrows carved so carefully by the heavy, iron-tipped wooden ploughs during the autumn months are now frozen solid, forming long, parallel ridges that resemble waves frozen mid-motion on a silent, static sea. This intense cold serves a vital agricultural purpose. It breaks down the heavy, stubborn river clay, mellowing the soil and preparing it to receive the future seed grain with a gentle, cooperative texture when the warmth finally returns. The frost also acts as a natural cleanser, purging the fields of destructive pests and keeping the wild weeds dormant until the proper time for growth arrives. Beneath the frozen crust of the earth, far below the reach of the biting winter winds and the accumulating snowdrifts, a hidden subterranean world rests in a state of quiet, warm suspension. While the upper inches of the dark soil are locked in an iron-hard embrace, the deep roots of the ancient oaks, the wild hawthorns, and the cultivated fruit trees extend down into a zone where the earth retains its primordial protective warmth. Deep within these hidden chambers, the biological life of the forest sleeps securely. Earthworms and small burrowing creatures have retreated far below the frost line, curling tightly into tiny insulated nests lined with dried moss and grass, their breath and movements slowed to an almost imperceptible rhythm that expends the barest minimum of life energy. The sap within the trees has retreated from the exposed branches down into the massive, secure heart of the root systems, resting in a dense, concentrated form that preserves the life force of the plant against the most severe drops in temperature. It is a beautiful, invisible sanctuary of life operating under the unhurried, flawless laws of nature, completely shielded from the harshness of the winter skies. The inhabitants of the early medieval hamlet look out upon this silent, frozen landscape, not with fear or despair, but with a serene, profound respect for the natural order. They recognize that the intensity of the winter pause is directly proportional to the abundance of the coming summer harvest. A winter without a deep, steady freeze is often followed by a weak, pest-ridden growing season. The stillness of the resting soil mirrors the quietude that has settled into their own lives, validating their own decision to slow down their steps, bank their hearth fires, and rely upon the tactile truth of their wooden tally sticks. There is an immense, stabilizing peace in knowing that the earth is doing exactly what it must do, resting, breathing slowly beneath its blanket of snow, and gathering the silent strength that will eventually shatter the ice, awaken the sleeping seeds, and flood the valleys of Wessex with the vibrant golden light of a new spring. Through the vast, unblemished blanket of white that covers the ancient boundaries of the Shire, a solitary figure emerges slowly on the northern horizon, his deliberate movements breaking the absolute stillness of the frozen landscape. This is the travelling merchant, a hardy peddler who has spent his life navigating the shifting networks of the early medieval countryside. Carrying essential wares between the isolated communities of Wessex, he walks with a heavy, iron-shod wooden staff that makes a deep, rhythmic crunching sound in the drifted snow, helping him find his footing on paths that have been completely erased by the midwinter blizzards. On his back, supported by thick leather straps that press deeply into his woolen mantle, he carries a massive wooden pack frame covered in oiled sealskin to protect his precious cargo from the biting frost. His journey on this day has been long, silent, and treacherous, passing through empty valleys and along the edges of ancient snow-laden forests where the only signs of life are the delicate, frozen footprints of wild foxes and red deer. As he approaches the perimeter of the agricultural hamlet, the jingling of small iron pots and brass buckles hanging from his pack announces his arrival to the quiet village. He wears multiple layers of greasy sheepskin and heavy, coarse wool that have been darkened by the smoke of countless roadside campfires, his face heavily bearded and lined by exposure to the harsh winter winds. He is welcomed into the sheltered warmth of the estate's gateway not with suspicion, but with the quiet, genuine hospitality reserved for travellers who brave the winter highroads. Led into a small, stone-lined chamber beside the main tithe barn, he is invited to rest his weary body upon a low wooden bench while a servant offers him a warm earthenware mug of spiced apple cider. The rich, steaming aroma of the sweet liquid mixes with the cold, crisp scent of frost evaporating from his heavy clothing, creating a small oasis of physical comfort that slowly thaws his frozen fingers and relaxes his strained muscles. With slow, methodical movements, the peddler unfastens the leather toggles of his pack, revealing his small but incredibly vital treasure of winter necessities. He lays his wares out upon a clean wool cloth spread across the workbench, blocks of dark rock salt harvested from the distant southern coastlines, essential for preserving meats through the lean months, fine polished iron needles forged in the urban smithies of Winchester, small whetstones of grey slate, and dense cakes of refined tallow for lighting. In normal seasons, he would expect to receive small silver pennies in exchange for these items, his leather purse jingling with the thin coins stamped with the king's likeness. But on this journey, he knows the reality of the great silver famine that has gripped the land. He has passed through multiple shires without seeing a single piece of minted metal, the precious currency locked away or halted by the impassable roads and regional instability. The village reeve enters the room, carrying not a purse of coins but a selection of split wooden tally sticks crafted from seasoned hazel and oak. He explains the system to the travelling merchant, showing him how the village records its transactions using the unalterable grain of the forest timber. The peddler, initially skeptical as an outsider accustomed to the tangible weight of silver, lifts a pair of the interlocking sticks into his hands. He turns them slowly by the amber light of the hearth fire, running his rough thumb along the V-shaped incisions that traverse the joined faces of the wood. He observes the absolute, flawless symmetry of the split fibers, noticing how every natural irregularity in the tree's growth ring finds its exact matching sanctuary on the companion piece. He looks around the room at the village elders and sees a profound, unwavering faith in this organic ledger, a collective trust that is far more secure than any document written in an unfamiliar language. The merchant realizes that these wooden pieces are not mere sticks. They are living vouchers backed by the entire physical abundance of the manor's storehouses, the golden wheat bins, the heavy fleeces of wool and the recorded health of the living herds. He understands that a silver coin can be clipped, debased, or easily stolen by thieves on the lonely mountain passes, but a cleft hazel counterfoil is completely unique, useless to anyone else, and legally protected by the strict administrative peace of King Alfred's laws. With a quiet nod of absolute acceptance, he agrees to trade his precious rock salt and iron needles for a newly split tally stick, carved in his name to guarantee a specific measure of autumn wool and grain to be collected when the spring thaw finally reopens the trade routes. As he slips the lightweight piece of hazel into his inner pouch, a deep sense of security and peace settles over his mind, knowing that his hard-earned livelihood is safely anchored to the honest grain of the wood and the unyielding honour of the community. The architectural spirit of the early medieval community finds its most complete expression in the great timber hall, standing as the undisputed centre of social, legal and spiritual life within the Wessex settlement. This building is an elegant testament to the sophisticated carpentry traditions passed down through generations of master builders. Unlike the cold, rigid stone fortresses of the Roman past, which lie in crumbling ruins across the landscape, the timber hall is a living structure, crafted entirely from the organic gifts of the native forests. It possesses a flexible breathing strength that allows it to withstand the most severe trials of nature, adapting seamlessly to the intense stresses of the winter winds and the heavy accumulations of midwinter snow. To step through its wooden threshold is to enter a world of profound structural harmony, where human engineering mirrors the natural geometry and timeless endurance of the ancient woodlands. The foundation of the hall relies upon a monumental framework of massive weight-bearing posts, carved from the hearts of the oldest and straightest oaks in the district. These colossal pillars are sunk deep into the earth, their bases charred with fire by the builders to repel subterranean moisture and protect the wood from the silent decay of the soil. Rising vertically from the ground with an easy, majestic power, these pillars form a double row that runs the entire length of the building, dividing the massive interior space into a grand central nave and two sheltered side aisles. The surfaces of these oak posts bear the distinct rhythmic scars of the master carpenter's adze, a specialized curved axe that leaves a beautiful, undulating texture that resembles the gentle ripples of a slow-moving river. Over decades of human occupation, these pillars have been polished smooth at shoulder height by the constant friction of wool cloaks and the gentle touch of passing hands, acquiring a rich, golden patina that glows warmly in the dim light. Connecting these vertical giants are the heavy tie beams and diagonal braces that form the intricate network of the upper roof structure. This skeletal architecture is assembled entirely without the use of a single iron nail or metal bracket, which are far too scarce and rigid for such monumental carpentry. Instead, the master builders utilized traditional mortise and tenon joints, securing the massive timbers together with large hand-carved wooden pegs known as trenails. These wooden pins, driven tightly into precisely drilled holes, swell naturally over time as they absorb the ambient moisture of the hall, binding the structural elements together into a single, unbreakable entity. This organic joinery allows the entire building to breathe and move slightly in response to the fierce winter storms. When a massive gust of wind strikes the exterior walls, the hall does not break or fracture, but rather absorbs the pressure with a low, musical groan of shifting timber, settling back into its perfect equilibrium once the elements pass. Overhead, the roof climbs at a remarkably steep angle, forming a vast, soaring canopy of golden thatch that keeps the interior completely dry and perfectly insulated against the freezing air. This monumental roof is constructed from thousands of bundles of wild river reeds and sweet rye straw, harvested from the marshy lowlands during the late summer and meticulously layered by the village thatchers. The thatch is remarkably thick, forming a dense, woven barrier that completely swallows the sounds of the external world, turning the howling blizzards into a distant, harmless murmur. Inside the hall, looking up toward the ridgepole, the underside of the thatch is stained a deep, lustrous, velvet black by years of rising wood smoke. This carbon coating serves a vital functional purpose, creating a natural, waterproof glaze that protects the straw from decay and repels the wood-boring beetles that would otherwise compromise the integrity of the roof. The exterior walls of the hall are built using thick planks of oak cleaved vertically along the grain, arranged upright in deep grooves along the foundation line to form an unyielding, solid perimeter against wild predators and the biting cold. The gaps between the vertical planks are tightly sealed with a mixture of local blue clay, chopped straw, and river sand, preventing the cold winter drafts from penetrating the sanctuary within. Light enters only through narrow, high-placed shuttered openings that can be securely closed with heavy wooden slats during the deepest freeze. At the literal and spiritual center of the earthen floor lies the great long hearth, a rectangular pit lined with heavy river boulders that holds the eternal fire of the community. Wisps of pale wood smoke rise lazily from the amber coals, drifting slowly through the vast upper spaces of the rafters before finding their way out through small openings at the gables of the roof. The air inside the timber hall is incredibly rich and comforting, deeply saturated with the complex aromas of seasoned wood, old tallow, and dried herbs, providing an unassailable sanctuary of peace, trust, and quiet warmth through the darkest hours of the winter season. As the deep midwinter chill stretches into the final weeks of January, the quiet success of the wooden tally system within the village boundaries begins to ripple outward, moving naturally along the frozen pathways and snowy ridges to the neighbouring hamlets scattered across the valleys of Wessex. Human communities, even when physically isolated by deep snowdrifts and treacherous roads, are never entirely static. They are bound by ancient ties of kinship, marriage, and shared agricultural necessity. Word travels slow but steady through the winter landscape, carried by the low, melodious murmurs of hunters tracking wild game along the forest edges or shepherds meeting at the common boundary stones where the territories of different manors intersect. These travellers speak of the profound peace that has settled into the home village, describing how the simple, cleft branches of hazel and oak have completely dissolved the anxieties of the silver famine, creating an unshakable system of trust that requires neither minted coins nor the expensive parchment of distant administrative centres. Inspired by this elegant solution, the surrounding settlements gradually adopt the practice, creating an interconnected web of localized commerce that operates with absolute transparency and complete independence from the royal mints. When a farmer from the high southern terrace requires a specific measure of winter seed barley from his neighbour in the low river valley, they no longer need to wait for the impossible return of wandering merchants or search fruitlessly for rare silver pennies. Instead, they gather by the warm hearth of a boundary cottage, selecting a straight, seasoned stick from the local woods to serve as their silent arbitrator. The wood is split with the familiar, rhythmic tap of the mallet, and the iron knife carves the precise geometric notches that span both halves simultaneously. One piece remains with the provider in the valley, while the other is carried safely back to the upland hills, creating a dual record that binds the two distinct communities into a shared covenant of mutual survival. As we watch this silent, beautiful web of human connection expand across the frozen valleys of history, we take a soft moment to express our deep gratitude for your companionship on this journey. If these soothing historical tales help clear your mind and guide you toward a state of peaceful rest, please take a brief moment to subscribe to our channel, leave a gentle like on this narrative, and share these stories with others who seek a sanctuary of quiet comfort. Your presence helps us preserve these tranquil landscapes of the past, creating a steady rhythm of peace for your nightly rest. This organic expansion of the wooden ledgers effectively knits the entire district into a unified, self-sustaining economic ecosystem, completely insulated from the volatile political fortunes and currency fluctuations of the wider world. The value of a man's labour and the physical fruits of the earth are no longer dependent upon the scarce supply of precious metals, which can so easily be hoarded by distant rulers or intercepted by maritime raiders along the vulnerable coastlines. The true wealth of the land remains exactly where it belongs, in the deep grain bins, the warm cattle byres, and the heavy wool stores of the people who cultivate the soil. By utilizing the common timbers of their own forests, the inhabitants have reclaimed control over their own lives and relationships, crafting a localized economy that values honesty over sophistication and community solidarity over abstract financial systems. The landscape between the hamlets, dominated by vast expanses of ancient woodland and frozen watercourses, becomes a quiet theatre of peaceful cooperation. Along the narrow winter trails where the silver birches bend low under the heavy weight of the snow, the simple exchange of wooden counterfoils becomes a common sight, executed with a slow, dignified grace that respects the solemnity of the season. The small split sticks, resting quietly in the wool purses of ploughmen and weavers across multiple shires, form an unassailable fortress of social harmony. As the cold afternoon sun casts long violet shadows across the pristine snowfields, the entire district settles into a state of serene confidence, knowing that their collective survival is fully secured, written safely in the imperishable grain of the forest timber, and protected by an unyielding web of mutual reliance that fears neither the darkness of winter nor the absence of silver. The calendar of the natural world moves with an unhurried, majestic certainty, and as the final weeks of February settle over the valleys of Wessex, a subtle, almost imperceptible transformation begins to ripple through the frozen atmosphere. The sky, which for months had been a rigid dome of brilliant cold slate grey or intense biting blue, now softens into a gentle pearlescent hue of pale cream and misty lavender. The sun, climbing just a fraction higher across the southern horizon with each passing day, begins to shed its weak silver winter light, replacing it with a faint, ambient warmth that brushes against the snow-covered landscape like a soft, invisible hand. The intense, brittle freeze that had locked the entire early medieval countryside in an iron-like embrace since the late autumn solstice is slowly, gracefully losing its sharpest edge, giving way to the very first whispers of the seasonal transition. This atmospheric shift manifests most beautifully in the awakening of the village architecture, introducing a new, gentle melody into the profound silence that had blanketed the hamlet for so long. High above the dirt lanes, along the sweeping expanses of the thick golden thatch roofs, the heavy layers of accumulated frost and packed snow begin to respond to the changing temperature. The long, elegant icicles that had encrusted the overhanging eaves like polished crystal swords, some stretching the length of a traveller's staff, begin to soften at their cores. As the midday sun reaches its peak, The very first drops of liquid water form at the tips of these crystalline sculptures, breaking away to fall through the cool air with a slow, rhythmic cadence. The sound is an exquisite, organic music, a steady, melodic drip, drip, drip that punctures the winter stillness with a comforting regularity, falling onto the snowfields below and carving tiny, dark hollows into the white mantle. This rhythmic weeping of the roofs represents the heartbeat of a changing world, a soothing auditory sign that nature is preparing to break its long winter fast. Beneath the eaves of the grand tithe barns and the massive timber halls, the dripping water creates a continuous hypnotic murmur that echoes softly through the quiet lanes. The air, which had been so intensely dry and cold that it caught sharply in the throat, now carries a rich, complex dampness, the clean, evocative scent of thawing rye straw, the subtle musk of wet earth beginning to wake beneath its white blanket, and the faint, sweet aroma of melting river ice. The silver birch and ancient oak trees that border the settlement show the first signs of liberation as their heavy, icy armor gradually slides away, dropping in large, soft clumps into the deep snowdrifts below with a low, satisfying thud that breaks the forest quietude. Along the valley floor, the frozen watercourses that had served as silent, static roads of clear ice begin to experience their own internal awakening. Deep beneath the thick, translucent surface sheets, the dark currents of the rivers swell with the first trickles of melting snow migrating down from the high northern ridges. The ice responds to this unseen pressure with deep, resonant groans and low, rhythmic thumps that vibrate through the riverbanks, creating fine, web-like fractures that catch the pale sunlight like intricate lace. The margins of the streams slowly melt outward from the muddy shores, revealing small patches of dark, moving water that lap gently against the dead reeds and winter rushes, which chime softly together in the softening morning breeze. The village watermills, frozen fast for many long weeks, stand in quiet anticipation as the surrounding ice pools begin to liquefy, preparing the massive timber paddles for their eventual return to industrious life. For the inhabitants of the agricultural community, these first signs of the thaw bring a profound sense of peaceful anticipation and deep interior relief. They step out from the smoke-darkened interiors of their timber dwellings, wrapping their heavy wool cloaks tightly around their shoulders, to stand quietly in the pale sunshine and listen to the beautiful cascading music of the water dripping from their roofs. The approaching spring does not demand a sudden frantic rush of labor. Instead, it offers a slow, orderly progression toward the renewal of the earth. The farmers look upon the softening landscape with an absolute serene confidence, knowing that their survival through the harsh winter is fully secured. The split wooden tally sticks, resting safely within their warm household pouches, and the Lord's iron-bound repository chests, have protected their honor, their labor, and their food reserves through the darkest months. And they now wait patiently for the final regional audit that will welcome the arrival of the new agricultural year. In the philosophical framework of the 9th century agrarian mind, an agreement between two human souls was never viewed as a mere mechanical transaction or a cold, detached arrangement of numbers. To the inhabitants of these isolated Wessex hamlets, life was an interconnected tapestry where human actions, spiritual obligations, and the natural laws of the earth existed in a state of constant, fluid harmony. At the core of their societal ethics was the profound concept of triorth, an ancient Anglo-Saxon word that modern language translates as truth, but which carried a far deeper weight during the early medieval era, signifying absolute fidelity, loyalty, and the unbroken alignment of one's inner character with the external world. Remarkably, this word for truth shares its deepest linguistic roots with the word for a living tree, a conceptual binding that perfectly reveals how these early agricultural communities viewed the world. To them, a human promise was not meant to be a volatile, invisible whisper carried away by the winter wind. It was meant to be like a tree deeply rooted in the soil of the community, structurally sound and capable of enduring the most severe trials of time and season. When the village elders and the estate official chose to record their transactions upon cleft branches of hazel, oak, and ash, they were consciously engaging in a beautiful philosophical synthesis, physically binding their sacred spoken words to the organic fibers of the living forest. They recognized that a piece of seasoned timber was not an inanimate, empty object but a physical archive of the natural world. Within its tight growth rings and dense heartwood, the stick carried a flawless, chronological memory of the Earth's history, the wet summers of abundance, the bitter winters of defensive retreat, and the constant, patient turning of the cosmos. By carving the geometric V-shaped notches across the joined faces of the split wood, the human participants were embedding their own fragile societal obligations into this grand natural ledger. The contract became an extension of the forest itself, borrowing the timeless permanence and unyielding honesty of the trees to shield their human relationships from the corrupting influences of forgetfulness, greed, and deceit. This intimate relationship between human ethics and organic materials established a profound moral sanctuary within the early medieval countryside. In a culture where the spoken word was the primary vehicle for law and inheritance, an individual's oath was treated with the utmost spiritual reverence. A lie was not viewed simply as an administrative infraction or a private deception between two people. It was perceived as a violent disruption of the localized peace, a tear in the invisible fabric of the community that threatened to alienate the wrongdoer from the natural harmony that sustained them all. The split wooden tally stick served as an elegant physical anchor for this ethical framework, because the inner topography of the cleft wood was entirely unique, shaped by the unpredictable microscopic variations of the tree's natural growth. It was a physical impossibility to alter one half of the contract without destroying its ability to interlock with its twin. The wood itself became an incorruptible arbiter of truth, a silent natural witness that completely bypassed the need for complex foreign legal scripts or the presence of distant, militarized authorities. There was an immense stabilizing serenity in an economic system built upon this foundation of mutual honor and material clarity, cultivated a society where wealth was measured not by the accumulation of abstract, artificial tokens like rare silver coins, but by the tangible abundance of the earth and the unshakable integrity of human relationships. As the long winter evenings began to soften into the late February twilight, the inhabitants of the timber dwellings could sit by their hearth fires, running their fingers over the smooth bark and sharp incisions of their counterfoils with a sense of deep internal peace. They knew that their honor and their future security did not depend upon the volatile whims of distant rulers or the complex interpretations of cloistered scholars, but upon a piece of timber they had harvested from their own woods, split with their own hands, and verified through the ancient, honest laws of the land they cultivated with all their heart. As the rhythmic music of the thaw continues to echo from the overhanging eaves of the village buildings, the long-awaited morning arrives for the formal reconciliation of the winter accounts. Inside the great timber hall of the estate, an atmosphere of deep solemnity and quiet purpose settles over the gathered assembly. The village elders, the local smallholders, and the estate weavers have come together not with the nervous apprehension that so often accompanies an official tax collection, but with a serene, patient curiosity. They take their places upon the long oak benches, their heavy woolen cloaks draped elegantly around them, their movements slow and measured in the cool, ambient air of the hall. In the center of the room, the long oak table stands prepared beneath the high rafters, illuminated by a combination of the soft, pale morning sunlight filtering through the narrow shutters and the warm, steady amber glow of a few large tallow candles. Beside the table sits the master of the estate's repositories, his large ring of brass keys resting quietly upon the wood, ready to unlock the great iron-bound chests that have guarded the village's primary foils through the darkest months of the freeze. The official leans forward, his movements deliberate and unhurried as he selects the first heavy key, sliding it into the intricate iron lock of the repository chest. With a deep, resonant metallic click that echoes softly through the vast timber architecture of the hall, the heavy oak lid is raised, releasing the rich, evocative scents of old iron, protective beeswax, and dried lavender sprigs into the room. From the dark, orderly interior, the official carefully lifts a handful of the primary foils, the longer, base sections of the split hazel and oak branches that were carved during the early winter meetings. At the same moment, an elderly smallholder farmer steps forward from the edge of the crowd, his calloused hand reaching deep into his woolen pouch to retrieve his own matching counterfoil. The two pieces of timber, which have spent months separated by thick stone walls and heavy iron locks, are about to be reunited under the watchful eyes of the community elders. Before the pieces are joined, the official and the farmer hold them side by side in the soft candlelight, allowing the assembly to observe the unique history written upon their surfaces. The primary foil, having rested in the dark safety of the Lord's chest, retains the clean, pale hue of freshly split heartwood within its incisions. In contrast, the farmer's counterfoil has acquired a beautiful, subtle patina from months of resting near the cottage hearth fires, its silvery bark slightly darkened by the gentle touch of wood smoke and the natural oils of human hands. Yet, despite these superficial differences born of their separate journeys, the structural geometry of the two pieces remains entirely unchanged. The V-shaped notches carved across their outer barks months ago line up with a geometric precision, waiting like pieces of an ancient natural puzzle to be restored to their original unified form. With a slow, graceful movement of his hands, the official places the face of the primary foil directly against the split surface of the counterfoil. As the two pieces press together, a beautiful, mesmerizing alignment takes place. The intricate, three-dimensional landscape of the inner wood, the microscopic ridges, the undulating growth rings, and the tiny bundles of organic fibers slides flawlessly into its corresponding valleys and hollows. There is a soft, muffled organic click, a gentle, satisfying thud of wood meeting wood that signals an absolute perfect reunion. The seam between the two halves practically vanishes from view, restoring the illusion of a solid, unbroken branch that had grown as a single entity in the ancient forests. The partial, jagged incisions carved along their edges merge seamlessly to form complete symmetrical diamonds and deep triangles, delivering an undeniable, visual proof of the transaction's absolute honesty. The verification of the contract is entirely tactile and instantaneous, requiring no lengthy debates, no complex calculations, and no specialized literacy. The official runs his bare thumb smoothly along the joined seam, feeling for any gap, any resistance, or any unnatural overlap that would indicate an attempt at alteration or deceit. His fingers find only a smooth, continuous surface, an unyielding testament to the unalterable truth preserved within the grain of the timber. A quiet, rhythmic nod of agreement passes between the official and the farmer, a silent validation that is immediately mirrored by the murmurs of satisfaction from the surrounding elders. The ledger has spoken not through volatile human memory or easily manipulated ink strokes, but through the permanent, incorruptible testimony of the forest itself. One by one, the village families step forward to watch their own tallies reunite, experiencing a profound, cascading wave of inner peace as each contract is verified with the same flawless precision, cementing the foundations of mutual trust and social harmony for the approaching agricultural year. As the late winter sun climbs steadily higher into the softening sky, its golden rays gain a newfound strength, casting long, warm patterns of light across the damp, dark earth where the snow has finally retreated. The profound stillness of the midwinter freeze gives way to a vibrant, purposeful energy that pulses through every corner of the Wessex settlement. The time for defensive rest has passed, the natural world is shifting its weight toward rebirth, and the community must move in perfect alignment with this seasonal awakening. In the open courtyards and outside the timber barns, the farmers and village smiths gather to prepare the vital instruments of the coming agricultural year, the heavy, oak-framed ploughs that will soon shatter the crust of the fallow fields and awaken the sleeping soil. The sound of the village blacksmith's forge echoes through the morning air, a sharp rhythmic clink-clink-clink of an iron hammer striking red-hot metal over a massive stone anvil. Farmers line up with their heavy wooden ploughs, inspecting the sturdy timber frames for any hairline fractures caused by the winter dampness and tightening the hand-carved ash pegs that hold the structure together. The master smith works with a practiced, unhurried intensity, heating the worn, iron-tipped ploughshares, the cutting blades of the plough, in a bed of pulsing charcoal embers until they glow a brilliant orange. With deliberate, forceful strokes, he sharpens the leading edges and repairs the iron shoes, ensuring they can pierce deep into the stubborn, clay-heavy river valleys without buckling against hidden stones. The rich metallic scent of heated iron mixes with the sharp tang of wood smoke and the sweet aroma of thawing earth, creating an olfactory anthem to the arriving spring. With the ploughs restored to their peak strength, the focus of the community turns back to the grand tithe barns for the crucial distribution of the seed grain. Planting a new crop requires absolute precision. Distributing too little grain would result in a sparse, weak harvest, while distributing too much would deplete the community's emergency food reserves before the summer maturity. To guide this delicate administrative task, the village reeve and the smallholders gather around the central oak table, retrieving the newly reconciled hazel and willow tally sticks from their leather pouches. These carved pieces of timber, bearing the immutable geometric code of the autumn contributions, serve as the definitive blueprint for the distribution process, ensuring that every family receives the exact allotment of seed barley and winter wheat required for their designated acreage. The reeve adjusts his horn lantern, its warm light illuminating the interlocking notches of a joined tally stick representing a prominent village family. He traces the deep thumb-width markings with his bare finger, reading the tactile record of their previous honesty and material wealth. Based on this precise physical archive, two robust granary assistants climb the timber ladders into the deep bays behind them, plunging large wooden scoops into the massive bins of golden grain. The sound of the dry seed grain cascading into heavy hemp sacks is a magnificent rustling melody, a fluid hiss that sounds like a gentle summer rain passing over a field of ripe oats. Each sack is filled to a uniform weight, tied securely with cords of twisted flax, and loaded carefully onto the sturdy wooden ox carts waiting in the muddy courtyard outside. There is a deep, unshakable sense of security and mutual respect that fills the barn during this distribution. The illiterate ploughman does not need to trust the spoken word of a powerful official, nor does he need to decipher complex written manifests. He can simply hold his own matching counterfoil against the reeve's piece, feeling the perfect alignment of the incisions with his own thumb. The wood guarantees that the distribution is executed with absolute equity, protecting the rights of the humblest labourer and preserving the internal peace of the entire district. As the loaded ox carts begin their slow, creaking journeys out toward the glistening, damp furrows of the open fields, the community steps into the new season with an absolute confidence, their future prosperity safely anchored to the honest grain of the forest timber and the unyielding truth of their shared survival. With the distribution of the seed grain complete and the ox carts fading into the distance toward the expansive, dark furrows of the fields, a quiet reverence falls over the manorial hall. The frantic energy of the morning gives way to a tranquil, almost ceremonial stillness. The great oak table, which for weeks served as the tense boundary line between debt and survival, is now cleared of its heavy burdens. Only the reconciled tally sticks remain, lying in neat, parallel rows like quiet warriors who have successfully defended the village through the long, freezing dark. The reeve and the village elders gather around these wooden artifacts one last time, preparing to close the winter ledger chapter and grant the community a clean slate for the approaching agricultural cycle. For the short-term agreements and minor transactional tallies, the official retrieves a highly specialized tool from his leather kit, a double-handled iron draw knife, its blade honed to a razor-sharp, silver edge. He secures a reconciled hazel stick into a small wooden vise on the workbench. With a slow, steady and remarkably fluid movement, he draws the iron blade across the joined face of the timber. The sharp metal bites into the wood with a soft, satisfying shit sound, cleanly shaving away the V-shaped notches and the darkened patina of winter wood smoke. Long, curling ribbons of pale, cream-coloured hazel wood spill over the edge of the table, falling softly to the earthen floor like discarded winter coats. In a matter of moments, the textured code of past debts is completely erased, leaving behind a perfectly smooth, blank surface of fresh heartwood. The branch has been reborn, stripped of its history, and made ready to record the entirely new relationships, labours, and yields of the spring season. Shaving the tally stick was an act of profound social renewal, an early medieval rendering of a cleared balance sheet, returning both parties to a state of perfect, unburdened equality before the new earth. While the smaller tallies are planed smooth for reuse, the great structural contracts, those documenting the permanent herd sizes, the ancestral land boundaries, and the major tithes paid to the crown under King Alfred's law, are treated with a different kind of respect. These sticks are not shaved down. Instead, they are carefully paired with their matching twins, wrapped together in squares of soft grease-treated calfskin to repel the spring dampness, and tied securely with braided flax twine. The official lowers these bundles into the deepest, coolest recesses of the grand iron-bound oak chest. Here, in the protective darkness, surrounded by the lingering scent of dried lavender and old iron, they will rest undisturbed for years to come. They form the permanent historical archive of the manor, a silent, material memory that future generations can access simply by reaching into the dark and letting their fingers trace the unyielding geometry of the past. Outside the thick timber walls of the hall, the natural world provides the ultimate validation for this administrative cleansing. Across the vast, undulating open fields where the heavy iron ploughs have turned the dark river clay toward the sky, the very first green shoots of the new crop begin to pierce the damp crust of the earth. These tiny, fragile blades of winter wheat and barley are a brilliant, luminous emerald green standing in stark, beautiful contrast to the deep brown soil. They emerge in long, mathematically perfect lines that follow the exact paths carved by the ploughman, pushing upward with a quiet, unstoppable force that shatters the last remaining crystals of ground frost. The air is warm, thick with the rich, intoxicating scent of living earth, growing vegetation, and the distant musical rushing of rivers completely freed from their icy prisons. The inhabitants of the hamlet walk out into the bright morning sunshine, their steps light and their minds entirely at peace. They look across the greening fields, knowing that the structural honesty of their wooden ledgers has brought them safely to this moment of absolute renewal. The anxiety of the winter freeze and the fear of the silver famine have dissolved entirely into the soft spring mud. They have survived by relying on the materials of their own land and the integrity of their shared promises, and as they watch the new life bloom around them, they step forward into the workspace of the sun with an unshakable confidence, completely secure in the timeless harmony of their well-governed world. The seasonal cycle has completed its slow, majestic turn, leaving the memory of the great midwinter freeze to dissolve into the warm, vibrant realities of a new agricultural year. Yet, as the years lengthen into decades and the decades fade into centuries, the simple innovation of the cleft wooden tally stick remains an unyielding cornerstone of human civilization. The small village in the hills of Wessex, which turned to the native forests out of absolute necessity during a modern crisis of currency and isolation, had stumbled upon a fundamental truth of administrative engineering. They proved that the most secure, equitable, and enduring systems of human governance are not those built upon complex abstract languages or rare volatile metals, but those that are deeply rooted in the accessible materials of the earth and the transparent honor of the ordinary people who cultivate it. This elegant system of the foil and counterfoil did not disappear with the passing of King Alfred's era or the eventual return of silver coinage to the regional marketplaces. Instead, its brilliant utility caused it to migrate from the rustic tithe barns of the countryside into the highest chambers of continental power. The Norman kings who succeeded the Anglo-Saxons recognized the absolute incorruptibility of the split wood, adopting the tally stick as the primary accounting tool of the royal exchequer in London. For hundreds of years, while majestic stone castles were built and empires rose and fell across the European continent, the financial records of one of the world's greatest kingdoms were kept not on expensive sheets of parchment or paper ledgers, but on slender, notched sticks of seasoned hazelwood, stored in massive vaults beneath the feet of the king's ministers. The wooden tally system proved to be one of the longest-lasting administrative tools in human history, serving as the official record of the British Empire's treasury until the early decades of the 19th century. When we look back across the vast expanse of history at the quiet world of the early medieval hamlet, the legacy of the split wood reveals itself as a magnificent monument to human ingenuity. It challenges the modern assumption that sophistication requires complexity, proving instead that true genius often lies in the absolute reduction of a system to its essential material elements. The illiterate ploughman, the weaving mistress, and the estate official had fashioned a sanctuary of absolute trust using nothing more than a common forest branch, a sharp iron knife, and a shared commitment to the sacred weight of their spoken promises. It was a system where justice could be felt by a bare thumb, where fraud was physically rejected by the natural growth of the timber, and where every member of the community stood on entirely equal ground before the unalterable testimony of the creation. As the twilight of the past settles gently over the historic valleys of Wessex, a profound eternal peace blankets the memory of the ancient land. The trees of the old forests continue to grow straight and true under the changing skies, their hidden rings silently documenting the slow passage of the seasons, just as they did 1,000 years ago. Though the physical sticks carved by the village reeve have long since crumbled into the dark soil, the spirit of their innovation endures as a timeless reminder of what human society can achieve when its systems are built upon mutual reliance, material clarity, and the unyielding honesty of the human heart. The ledger of the silent wood is closed, resting safely in the permanent archives of human history, leaving behind a legacy of serene trust that continues to illuminate the dark corners of the past like the warm, eternal glow of a banked hearth fire. The channel History Under Moonlight is a storytelling platform created for entertainment, inspiration, education, and the promotion of relaxation and peaceful sleep. All stories presented on this channel are global historical tales gently curated and narrated based on themes such as the rise and fall of nations, human cultures, and extraordinary journeys through time.